Hey legends, welcome to Savage Harry. Buckle up for today's story. What if Harry Potter and Luna Lovegood were bound by a forbidden love? A like and subscribe goes a long way. Now let's jump in. Chapter 1. The Hollow Year. The owl arrived at 7:30 on a Tuesday, which was the sort of unremarkable detail that Harry Potter had started cataloging obsessively. He didn't know when that had started, the collecting of small, ordinary facts, the time on the clock, the temperature of his tea. The exact number of steps between the kitchen and the front door of the terraced house in Islington that he and Ginny had been sharing for 14 months. 41 steps. He'd counted 3 times and gotten a different number each time, which said something about either the house or his state of mind, and he suspected it wasn't the house. The owl, Ministry Standard Brown expression of bureaucratic indifference, dropped a scroll on his toast and left without waiting for a reply. Harry unrolled it one-handed, the other hand still wrapped around his mug. Potter, you're needed at Stoatshead Hill by end of week. Possible Class 3 magical disturbance. Take Finnegan if he stopped moping. Robards. He set it down next to the butter dish and finished his tea. Ginny came downstairs in her Holyhead Harpies training kit, hair half-plaited, the tail of it hanging over one shoulder like a rope she'd forgot to finish tying. She looked at the scroll, looked at him, and went to the kettle. Robards, she said. Yeah, Stoatshead Hill, that's in Devon, isn't it? West Yorkshire, actually. Right, she poured water that hadn't quite finished boiling and winced. When? By end of week. He watched her wrap both hands around the mug, shoulders curving forward slightly in that way she had when she was thinking about something she wasn't planning to say yet. He recognized it because he did the same thing. They'd picked up each other's habits like lint on robes quietly without noticing until you looked closely and couldn't remember which was originally yours. I'll probably go tomorrow, get ahead of it. Ginny nodded. Training's till 6, I won't, she paused. I'll see you before you go. Course, Harry said. She smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and familiar, which was somehow harder to look at than an upset one would have been. He smiled back. They were very good at smiling at each other. They'd had 2 years of practice. He folded the scroll, tucked it in his jacket pocket, and went to find his boots. The Ministry of Magic, for all its post-war renovation, still smelled like someone had once made a significant administrative error in the elevator and cleaned it up insufficiently. Harry walked through the atrium with his hands in his pockets and his collar up, which did precisely nothing to reduce recognition. He'd tried hats twice. The Prophet had printed photos both times with headlines like Chosen One Goes Casual and Is Potter's Hair a Security Risk. He'd stopped bothering. Morning, Potter. The witch at the security desk, Marjorie, who had been at that desk since before he was born and would likely outlast the building, didn't look up from her copy of Witch Weekly. Someone's waiting for you in the Auror bullpen. Foreign witch, very blonde. Harry's steps slowed slightly. Foreign, Swedish, I'd guess from the look of her, or possibly Norwegian. Marjorie turned a page. Nice earrings anyway. He took the stairs rather than the lift, which was a choice entirely unrelated to the fact that thinking about Swedish or Norwegian witches with nice earrings had produced, somewhere in the center of his chest, a small, inexplicable sensation approximately like missing something he hadn't realized he'd lost. Luna Lovegood was sitting on the edge of Seamus Finnegan's desk, her desk, she'd apparently decided, regardless of Seamus's ownership of it, with her legs crossed and a large, battered field journal open across her knees. She was wearing a long coat the color of antique linen, covered in pockets, and her hair was different than he remembered, longer, with a complicated braid that incorporated what appeared to be a small piece of actual coral. Her earrings were tiny silver crescent moons. She was reading something in the journal and tracing a line of her own handwriting with one finger, lips slightly parted, entirely at ease in a room that belonged to someone else. Seamus was standing approximately 3 feet away, holding a folder he'd clearly been meaning to put down, watching her with an expression of baffled delight. Harry stopped in the doorway. Luna looked up. Her eyes found him immediately, the way they always had, not scanning the room and arriving at him but going directly as if she already knew the precise coordinates of where he'd be standing. Harry, she said and smiled. It was not the smile from downstairs. It was not practiced or maintained or aimed at anything. It was just pleased, simply completely pleased, the way a person looked when something they'd been quietly hoping for arrived without announcement. Luna, he said. He crossed the room and she stood and they hugged. She was taller than he remembered, or he'd been remembering her wrong, and she smelled like salt water and something herbal he couldn't name. When did you get back? Last Thursday, she said, pulling back and looking at him with that particular directness she'd always had, the kind that felt less like scrutiny and more like she was reading the actual text of a person rather than just the cover. You look tired. Morning to you too. I mean it genuinely. Not as a criticism, you look like someone who's been sleeping but not actually resting. She tilted her head. Have you been dreaming about the war again? Behind her, Seamus mouthed to a she at Harry, which Harry ignored. Seamus, this is Luna Lovegood, he said. She was at Hogwarts with us, a year below. Luna Lovegood, Seamus repeated and pointed at her. The one who helped break into Gringotts. I was mostly moral support for that part, Luna said pleasantly. She also kept Neville sane during our 7th year, fought at the Battle of Hogwarts, and has spent the last 2 years in. Harry stopped. Where have you been? Everywhere, mostly. She settled back on Seamus's desk as if it were a perfectly natural place to land. Iceland for the winter. Then the Hebrides, there's something extraordinary happening in the sea caves there, I'll tell you about it later. Then I went east, Mongolia, Tibet. I was in Sri Lanka for 4 months, which was magnificent, and I've just come from the Faroe Islands. She paused. And before that, briefly, a research vessel in the North Sea, but that's what I'm actually here about. The Stoats Head Report, Harry said. She opened the journal to a specific page and held it out. The sketch was detailed, 3 concentric rings of what looked like fractured air, rendered in careful pencil with measurements noted at the margins in Luna's precise, unhurried hand. I encountered something similar off the Faroe coast 6 weeks ago. The research vessel's instruments couldn't read it, Muggle instruments obviously, but my own measurements suggested a significant displacement of ambient magical field, as though the fabric of space in that location had been stressed, like material that's been pulled too tight. She looked up at him. I've been trying to find the right word for it, and that's the closest I've come. Stressed. Harry looked at the sketch. The precision of it surprised him, though it shouldn't have. Luna had always been far more rigorous than her dreamy exterior suggested, and 2 years of solo field research in remote magical territories would sharpen anyone. The Class 3 report from Stoats Head Hill describes visual phenomena consistent with this, he said. I know, I read it. You read a classified Auror field report. I had a copy sent to the Quibbler. My father still runs it technically, though I edit most of the interesting sections now. She smiled, untroubled. You should put us on the official press list, Harry. We're really very accurate. Seamus laughed, then tried to disguise it as a cough. Harry handed the journal back to her. Come to the briefing at 2, and are you staying in London? Grimmauld Place, if that's all right. I let myself in last night. Mrs. Weasley had the key and she said you'd said it was open. He hadn't said that, but it was the sort of thing he'd have said if asked, which was apparently close enough. Of course it's all right. Wonderful. She stood, gathered her journal, and tucked it under her arm. And Harry, yeah, it's very good to see you. Said the same way she said everything, with a weightlessness that somehow made it feel heavier than it should. Like she'd considered all the other things she could have said and chosen the most precise one. You should eat breakfast, you didn't this morning. He stared at her. There's a crease on your collar from leaning on your hand, she explained. The angle is wrong for someone sitting at a table with a plate in front of them. You were holding something, a mug probably. She walked past him toward the corridor. I'll see you at 2. Seamus waited until she was definitely gone. Then he turned to Harry with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something that would take him several days to fully process. Mate, he said. What was that? That's just Luna, Harry said, which was either a complete answer or no answer at all, depending on how well you knew either of them. The 2 o'clock briefing was held in the Auror department's largest meeting room, which smelled like old parchment and the particular magical residue of too many difficult conversations. Robard stood at the head of the table, a man built like a wardrobe who ran the department with the energy of someone who had personally decided to make sure the post-war ministry didn't slide back into the same comfortable rot it had before Voldemort had even arrived. Harry respected him enormously in the specific way you respected people whose expectations of you were very high and whose disappointment would feel genuinely terrible. There were 6 of them around the table. Harry, Seamus, a senior Auror called Priya Chakraborty who had transferred from the Indian ministry the year before and was the most technically gifted field operative Harry had ever seen. 2 junior Aurors whose names Harry always remembered in the field and somehow forgot in rooms like this. And Luna, who had positioned herself in a corner chair slightly outside the main cluster, and was taking notes before Robards had even started speaking. Robards dropped a thick folder on the table. Stoats Head Hill, West Yorkshire, first report came in 11 days ago. Local wizarding family reported a phenomenon in their rear paddock. Described it as an area approximately 4 meters in diameter where light behaved incorrectly. He looked up. Their phrase, light behaved incorrectly. 3 ministry observers confirmed the phenomenon 2 days later. It has since grown to approximately 9 meters and is exhibiting what the Unspeakables are calling resonance pulses, intermittent surges that expand the boundary temporarily before contracting again. During one of those expansions, a sheep walked through it. A beat. The sheep was fine, he continued, completely unharmed. However, it emerged approximately 6 feet to the left of where it entered, and seemed briefly confused about the direction of grass, which is apparently unusual for sheep. Very unusual, Luna said without looking up from her notes. Sheep have excellent spatial memory. Robards looked at her with the particular expression of a man deciding whether to pursue that or not. He decided not. The Unspeakables have classified it as a localized reality fracture. Class 3 because it's stable, contained, and not currently posing a direct threat. We are treating it as Class 3 because that's the classification they gave it. Our job, he looked around the table, is not to determine what it is. That's for the Unspeakables. Our job is to establish a perimeter, ensure no muggles wander in and report any escalation. What's the magical signature? Priya asked. She had a quick economical way of cutting to the point that Harry found deeply satisfying. Robards glanced at the folder. The Unspeakables say it matches no known spell or curse. The closest analog in their records is residual hallow resonance. He said it the way people said things they'd been told to report without understanding them. Whatever that means. Harry felt Luna's gaze move to him from across the table. He didn't look at her. She didn't press, she just wrote something in the journal. Teams, Priya said, Potter and Lovegood, since she's apparently already knee-deep in it. Robards said it without particular inflection, the way he assigned all pairings purely logistically. Chakraborty, you're with Finnegan, the 2 juniors on perimeter. We leave tomorrow morning 7 sharp. He closed the folder. Any questions? Luna raised her hand. Robards looked at her. Has anyone spoken to the sheep? She said. The silence lasted about 3 seconds. She means documented its behavior, Harry said. For the research record, it could show signs of temporal or spatial displacement. Luna looked at Harry. Harry looked at his notes. Robards rubbed his face. Someone document the sheep, he said, and ended the meeting. Grimmauld Place at night was a different creature than Grimmauld Place in daylight. In the day it was just a tall, old house full of rooms Harry hadn't finished deciding what to do with. The furniture a mix of black family antiques and things he'd bought himself, and creatures' relentless, devoted polishing. At night the house went quiet in a way that'd wait, like it was listening. Like the walls had heard too many serious conversations and were quietly holding all of them. Harry found Luna in the kitchen, which was where people always ended up in that house, because the kitchen was warm and the rest of it wasn't, not really. She'd made tea, not from the good tea he kept in the cabinet, but from something she'd brought herself loose leaf in a small tin that smelled like it had been in her bag for months and was better for it. She'd set 2 cups out. He sat down across from her without being invited, because it wasn't the kind of kitchen where you needed to be invited, and wrapped his hands around the cup. Hallow resonance, he said. Yes. She looked at the tea in her cup. That's what I've been thinking too. The Elder Wands in Dumbledore's tomb. The stone's lost, I dropped it in the forest. The cloak's mine. He paused. They're separated, permanently separated. Are they? Luna said, not challengingly, just curiously, the way she turned most statements over to look at their undersides. You've always assumed that separating them resolved the problem, but consider the Hallows were created together. They resonate with each other because they were made in relation to each other. Separating them doesn't end that resonance. It might just untether it. Let it propagate outward like a signal without a receiver. She curled both hands around her cup. When I was in the Faroe Islands, I spoke with a scholar who'd been studying the theory that hallow resonance is cumulative, that it builds over time in magical field and eventually needs somewhere to go. Harry looked at her. When did you start thinking about this? In Iceland, about 14 months ago. She looked up. I've been writing to Hermione. She thinks I'm onto something but hasn't had time to pursue it herself. She sent me 3 books and a very long letter full of qualifications. Hermione qualifications, or excited Hermione qualifications? The corner of Luna's mouth moved. Excited Hermione qualifications, which are the ones you know are worth something. He laughed, a short, genuine sound that surprised him slightly. The way laughter sometimes does when you haven't done it in a while and forgot it was a thing your body was capable of. Luna noticed, he could tell, but she didn't comment on it. She just looked slightly pleased in the way she looked slightly pleased at things she found good quietly without making a production of it. So you think the rifts are a consequence, he said. Not an attack, not deliberately created. I think they might have started that way, she set her cup down, but I also think someone may have noticed them and decided to study them or use them. She pushed the journal across the table. It was open to a different page now, not the sketch but notes. Names, dates, patterns. There are 7 documented incidents I've found in the last 10 months, across Europe, all in areas with historical hallow significance. He scanned the page. Something Hermione adjacent stirred in him, the old investigative pull, the one that used to kick in when a puzzle started showing its shape. He'd missed that feeling. He hadn't realized he'd missed it until right now. The Unspeakables know about this. He said they have pieces of it, but the ministry tends to compartmentalize. She said it without judgment. I have the advantage of not working for any institution, which means I can look at all the pieces at once. Harry turned a page. There was a name circled at the top of one of the lists: A. Voss, former Department of Mysteries, Research Focus, Hallow Theory, status, resigned 18 months ago. Who's this? Someone I haven't been able to find yet. She reached over and tapped the name without quite touching the page. He presented a theoretical framework to the International Council of Warlocks 4 years ago, the idea that Hallow resonance could be harvested and stabilized. Redirected, most people dismissed it. The council called it speculative philosophy. She paused. But 2 of his research assistants from that period have been present independently in the vicinity of 4 of these 7 incidents. Harry looked at her. You think he's causing them? I think he might be studying them, she said carefully, or attempting to harness them. Whether he caused them initially or simply found them, I'm not certain yet. Her finger moved off the page. But someone with intimate knowledge of Hallow resonance theory, who has gone dark from the institutional record, who has people near these sites, that's the kind of thing you should know about. Luna, he looked at her across the kitchen table. How long have you been doing this? Researching it? Investigating it, alone. She considered the question without deflecting it. About 10 months seriously. The first few months were just patterns I noticed and couldn't stop thinking about. She tilted her head. I was in Tibet when the shape of it became clear. I sat with a monk who said something to me, roughly translated: the space between stars is not empty, it is the memory of light that has moved on. He meant something entirely different about impermanence. But it made me think about resonance, about what remains after the original source is gone. She looked at her hands. The Hallows aren't present anymore, not together, not intact, but their resonance remains. It's accumulating in space in magical field like sound in a room that was built to carry it. The kitchen was quiet. The faint settling sounds of the old house, the distant noise of London doing London things beyond the walls. Harry thought about the Elder Wand, cool and ancient in Dumbledore's tomb. The resurrection stone somewhere in the leaf mold of the Forbidden Forest. The cloak folded in his chest of drawers upstairs, soft as running water. I'll bring you into the investigation, he said. Officially, not just as a civilian observer. I'm not sure Robards will. Robards trusts my judgment on field assets. He met her eyes. And you're the most informed person I've found on this, by a significant margin. She looked at him for a moment. All right, she said, and then simply, thank you, Harry. Don't thank me. You've been working this problem alone for almost a year. He stopped. That's a lot to carry. I don't mind carrying things, she said. I just mind carrying them in the wrong direction. A pause. That's why I came to London. He wasn't sure if she meant the investigation or something else. With Luna, these were not always separable. He let it go because the kitchen was warm and the tea was good, and some things were better approached sideways, over time, rather than head-on. Get some sleep, he said, standing and taking his cup to the sink. Robard said 7 sharp, and he's actually said 6 before and told us 7 so that we'd arrive at 6. I know, Luna said. I set my alarm for 5. He turned at the door. She was looking into her cup, relaxed and unhurried, as though sitting in someone else's kitchen at 10 at night were the most natural place she could be. As though she'd always belonged there and was simply giving the house time to figure that out. Night, Luna. Good night, Harry. He went up to bed. He lay in the dark for a while, in the way he did most nights, waiting for sleep to arrive or not arrive as it chose. But tonight the hollow feeling that usually accompanied that waiting was slightly different. Not gone, not fixed, just slightly less hollow, the way a room feels different when there's someone else in the house. He fell asleep faster than he had in weeks. Ginny called the next morning at 5:45. He answered from the kitchen, already dressed, Luna's tea tin on the counter beside the kettle. You're up early, Ginny said. Her voice had that bright, practiced warmth that he knew was genuine but also was a kind of performance, the way she addressed the world in general. He used to love it unreservedly. Now he loved it the way you loved something whose mechanics you'd come to understand too well. Heading out, Yorkshire. Right, the Stoats Head thing, be careful. Always, a pause, the kind of pause that in the early days of their relationship would have been filled with something, a joke, a plan, something warm. Now it was just a pause, and they both lived in it without quite knowing how to furnish it. Harry, she said, her voice shifted, not the performed warmth now, something more careful. Is everything all right? With us, I mean, I keep feeling like there's something I'm not. She stopped herself. Ginny didn't often stop herself. Never mind, I'll see you when you're back, Gin. It's early and you've got a case. Go, she said it gently. That was the terrible thing about Ginny. Even when she was protecting herself, she did it gently. Take care of yourself. You too, he said. After she rang off, he stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then Luna appeared in the doorway in her field coat, journal under one arm, the small coral piece plaited neatly back into her hair, looking entirely rested and ready in the way of someone whose relationship with sleep was uncomplicated. She looked at the phone. She looked at him. She asked nothing. Ready, he said. I've been ready since 5, she confirmed and walked to the front door. Harry pocketed his wand, checked his jacket for his Auror badge, an old habit, always the right shoulder pocket, and followed her. The morning was gray and cool and smelled like the city waking up. They walked toward the apparition point at the end of the street, side by side, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed without either of them moving apart. Luna was looking at the sky, which was just beginning to lighten along the eastern edge, the dark blue softening toward something more complicated. I had a dream about the forest last night, Harry said. He hadn't meant to say it. It came out the way things sometimes did with Luna without the usual internal filtration process. The night I walked in to die. She didn't look away from the sky. Did you see your parents again? Number just the forest, and the stone, I dropped it somewhere before the clearing. In the dream I could see it, just sitting there in the leaves. He watched his own breath mist in the cold air, and I remember thinking even in the dream that it was in exactly the right place, exactly where it should be. Yes, Luna said, I think it probably is. He looked at her. She looked at him briefly, those pale, clear eyes, the kind that didn't accumulate things, that looked at whatever was in front of them completely and without the layers most people's eyes had. You're not afraid of it, she said, not a question, an observation filed away somewhere in that extraordinary mind of hers. The death you walked toward, most people who have been that close to it are. I was afraid going in, he said. Coming out felt different. Because you chose it, Luna said simply. There's a difference between the death that finds you and the death you walk toward. One takes you, the other, she considered. The other just shows you where the edge of yourself is, and then you walk back. He didn't have anything to say to that. He just walked beside her through the gray London morning, and thought about edges and walking back, and somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he wasn't fully attending to yet, something that had been hollowed out for 2 years began very quietly to fill. The apparition point was a narrow alley between 2 buildings, marked with a small brass plaque that said maintenance access in the kind of font that discouraged muggles from reading it too carefully. Harry held out his arm. Luna took it, her grip easy and certain, neither tentative nor possessive, just there. He turned on the spot and the city vanished. Yorkshire opened up around them like a held breath released. Moorland in every direction, the early light coming sideways across the grass in long gold lines, the air sharp and clean in the specific way of high, open ground. A curlew called somewhere out of sight, the liquid, curving sound of it falling over the hill. Seamus and Priya materialized about 20 feet away, both wrapped in Auror field coats. Right on time, Seamus said, then looked at them. Specifically, Harry noticed at Luna's hand still loosely on Harry's arm, and then away again with a perfectly casual expression that meant he definitely filed that away. Robards isn't coming out himself. Senior Unspeakable is meeting us at the site. Which Unspeakable? Harry said. Didn't say, you know how they are, they'd classify the name of their own lunch if they could. Priya was scanning the horizon with the focused, economical attention that Harry had come to recognize as her default mode of existing in the field. The local family's property is 2 kilometers that way. She pointed northeast. I did a flyover on a broom last night. The phenomenon is visible from altitude. It looks like heat haze but reversed, like cold rising instead of heat. Light behaving incorrectly, Luna said, pulling out her journal. Exactly that. Priya looked at her with professional curiosity. You've seen it before. Something very similar. In the North Sea 6 weeks ago. Luna was already sketching the lie of the land, the hill, the direction Priya had pointed. What's the geology of this area? Limestone mostly. Good conductor of magical field, Luna said. That would explain the localization. Limestone veins can channel ambient magical resonance the way copper channels electricity. She was writing as she walked, not looking at the path, somehow not falling over anything. We'll want readings of the surrounding stone. I have an instrument. She reached into one of the many pockets of her coat and produced something that looked like a compass crossed with a thermometer. That measures magical field density. I modified it in Iceland. The original was designed for finding nargles, but the underlying principle, I believe her, Priya said to Harry. Smart policy, Harry said. They walked northeast across the moor, the 4 of them spread in a loose line, the 2 junior Aurors trailing behind with the equipment cases. The light was fully up now, the sky a clean pale blue with high, thin cloud. Harry walked and watched the horizon and felt, for the first time in months, that he could precisely identify that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. which was either about the case or about the company or about both, and he wasn't prepared to examine which, so he just walked. The rift was visible from 300 meters. Priya had called it heat haze reversed, and that was the closest he could get to it too, a circular area of roughly 10 meters diameter where the air seemed to bend slightly inward, the light going sideways rather than straight, the landscape beyond it visible but wrong in some way that his eyes couldn't quite resolve. Like looking at something through glass that was almost perfectly flat. Almost. The sheep were on the far side of a dry stone wall, as far from the rift as the paddock allowed, bunched together in that particular ovine configuration that indicated they had collectively decided something was wrong and were registering their unanimous complaint. Harry walked to the edge of the perimeter, an invisible line he could feel without being told, the way you could feel the edge of a repelling charm, a slight pressure in the air, and looked. Up close the rift had a sound. Barely. A low, subaudible pressure, more felt than heard. His Auror training cataloged it automatically, not dark magic signature, not curse or jinx or hex, not any known dark methodology, something older. Something that felt less like an attack and more like a consequence, like the scar left by something that had already happened elsewhere. Luna appeared beside him. She held up her modified compass thermometer. The needle swung immediately to an extreme and stayed there, vibrating slightly. Saturated, she said quietly. With what? She looked at him. Whatever it is, it's the same as the North Sea, identical signature. She watched the needle. Harry, someone has been here recently. The saturation level is too high for natural accumulation. Something has been introduced to this site. Harry looked at the rift, the gentle wrongness of the light within it. The sheep registering their complaint in the distance. All right, he said, the case had a shape now. Incomplete, the edges blurry, but there. He could feel the investigation forming around it the way he'd always been able to, the old instinct, the one he'd thought had gone somewhere quiet inside him and stopped working. It hadn't, it had just been waiting. He looked at Luna's notebook, at the name circled at the top of the page, A. Voss. Let's find out what someone introduced, he said. And who? Luna wrote something in the margin. He leaned slightly to see what. Harry's back, she'd written, and then, underneath in a smaller hand as if to herself, good. He straightened up and said nothing, because some things didn't need to be addressed directly, not yet, and because Luna already knew and knew he'd seen it and was perfectly comfortable with that, because Luna was comfortable with the truth of things in a way that very few people were. He turned to Priya. Let's set up the perimeter and start readings. I want everything documented before the Unspeakable arrives and classifies our notes. Priya almost smiled. Already ahead of you, she said, and went to brief the juniors. Seamus fell into step beside Harry, watching the rift with his arms crossed. That sheep looks personally offended, Seamus said. Wouldn't you be? Fair point. The investigation of the Hollow Year was over. Something else, some other kind of year, had just begun, and Harry Potter stood at the edge of a rift in the world and felt it starting in the air in his chest. In the particular quality of attention he found himself paying to the woman standing 3 feet to his left, compass in hand, writing things down with the absolute certainty of someone who knows exactly what she's looking for, even when what she's looking for has no name yet. Chapter 2, The Rift at Stoatshead Hill. The Unspeakable arrived at 9:30, and Harry disliked him immediately, which was not something he'd ever considered a reliable instinct, until the war had taught him that his instincts were, on balance, better than most people's carefully considered opinions. The man was tall, thin in the way of someone who'd been thin so long it had become architectural, all angles, no waist. He wore the standard unspeakable robe, hood down, and had the kind of face that gave very little away, which Harry recognized because he'd spent years practicing that same expression in mirrors. On him, it had never quite worked. On this man, it had clearly been there since birth. His name, offered without warmth and with the particular brevity of someone who considered names an unnecessary social transaction, was Caro, not a Death Eater Caro. Harry checked immediately, the way he always did when that name surfaced, the muscle memory of 7 years of mortal peril. A different Caro. Malcolm Caro, Department of Mysteries, senior researcher who produced a leather folder from inside his robe and held it out to Harry without preamble. Current Unspeakable Assessment, he said. 17 pages, the relevant section is 4. Harry took it. Luna, at his left shoulder, was already reading over his arm. Miss Lovegood, Caro said with the tonal precision of a man filing something away in a category he hadn't expected. Hello, Luna said, not looking up from the folder. You're not Ministry. Correct. Then your access to Department of Mysteries. I'm here as a field asset to Auror Potter, Luna said pleasantly. You can take that up with Senior Auror Robards if you'd like. I think he's in until 6 most days. She turned a page. This assessment describes the resonance as passive accumulation, which it isn't. Someone's been seeding it. The silence that followed had a quality to it. Harry glanced at Caro. The man's expression hadn't changed, but something had moved behind it the way still water moves when something large passes beneath the surface. That's a significant claim, Caro said. Yes, Luna agreed. Most accurate things are. Harry handed the folder back. She's right, we took field readings this morning. The saturation levels are too high for passive accumulation over any natural timeframe. He kept his voice level, conversational, the tone he used in briefings when he wanted people to understand he was not suggesting but stating. The density also correlates with readings taken at a similar site in the North Sea 6 weeks ago, which means either these phenomena are systematically connected or they're responding to something that is. Caro looked at him for a long moment, then at Luna, then back. We're aware of the correlation, he said carefully. How many sites? Harry said, a pause that was one beat too long. That's classified. I've got clearance. Clearance for this site, not for. He stopped. Harry studied him. Caro wasn't lying. He wasn't trying to obstruct, not exactly. He was a man operating inside a system that had built walls around information and told him the walls were load-bearing. He genuinely believed that. But he was also a man who just had his own assessment challenged by a civilian field researcher with coral in her hair, and the discomfort of that was doing interesting things to his composure. 7 sites, Luna said. Caro's eyes snapped to her. I found 7 documented incidents. She held up the journal, open to the relevant page. Across Europe, all in areas with historical Hallow significance. I'm guessing your classified number is 7 or possibly 8 if you have one I haven't found yet. She waited. Do you have an 8? The muscle in Caro's jaw moved, just once. We have 8, he said, and it sounded like it cost him something. Wonderful, Luna said. Where's the 8th? He looked at Harry. Harry kept his expression neutral, not inviting, not pressuring, just present. In his experience, giving bureaucrats a moment to decide to be helpful was more efficient than pressuring them because pressured bureaucrats went defensive and helpful bureaucrats actually told you things. The Orkneys, Caro said, 3 weeks ago. We haven't released the report because the site is in an area with a complicated Muggle land registry situation and we're still, he stopped himself. The readings from the Orkney site are the highest we've recorded. Luna was already writing. Harry looked toward the rift. The morning light had shifted with the rising sun, and the wrongness of the light inside the boundary had sharpened, more visible now, almost prismatic at the edges. The kind of light that made the back of your eyes ache faintly if you looked directly at it. One of the junior Aurors, a young witch named Abbott, no relation to Hannah, who had introduced herself that way on her first day as if preempting confusion, had set up a monitoring array of small, calibrated instruments in a semicircle around the boundary. The instruments were ticking, some were ticking faster than others. What's the pulse frequency? Harry called to her. Abbott checked her notebook. Roughly every 40 minutes, sir. Last expansion was at 817. Lasted 90 seconds, expanded the boundary by approximately 1.5 meters, then contracted. And during expansion, any movement of ambient magic in the surrounding area. Yes, sir, significant, like when you pull a plug out of water, a kind of drawing inward. Drawing from which direction? She checked again, then frowned slightly. All directions, sir, but more strongly from the northeast. She pointed. From that direction specifically. Harry looked northeast. Moorland. A low ridge about 2 kilometers out, nothing visible. Luna, beside him, was looking at the same ridge. There's a standing stone formation on the other side of that ridge, she said. Pre-Roman, magical classification, heritage site, category 2, maintained resonance field. Harry looked at her. You already knew that. I did a great deal of reading on the train from London. Last night, I read quickly. Caro had approached to stand on Harry's other side. Whatever resistance he'd been offering had apparently receded in the face of the conversation simply proceeding without him. The standing stones are on our list, he said. We believe the rift may be drawing from that formation's natural resonance field, using it as a feed. Using or being used by, Luna said, which was such a precisely odd question that even Caro paused. I don't follow the distinction, he said. Something created this rift, Luna said. Whether that something is acting on the standing stones or whether the standing stones are acting on it changes the direction of cause and effect, which changes everything about how you'd address it. She looked at him patiently, the way she looked at people who were intelligent enough to understand her but hadn't gotten there yet. If the rift is drawing from the stones, you could interrupt the feed and the rift would weaken. If the rift was seated here specifically because the stones amplify whatever process is creating it, then interrupting the feed does nothing. You need to address the source. Caro looked at the rift, at the standing stones invisible beyond the ridge, at his folder. "We've been operating on the first assumption," he said. "I thought you might have been," Luna said, "and if there was any unkindness in it, it was so finely distributed as to be undetectable." Priya found the first footprints at 10:15. She didn't announce it dramatically. She walked over to Harry with the composed efficiency of someone who considered drama a waste of calories and said, "Northeast perimeter." Boot marks in the soft ground, approximately 10 meters from the boundary. 3 separate incidents from the layering different mud conditions, so different times. Most recent is probably within the last 5 days. Harry followed her to the northeast edge of the perimeter. The ground there dipped slightly, not a natural feature, he realized, crouching down. The ground had been compressed deliberately. Someone had stood here more than once. He cast a non-verbal trace analysis, an Auror technique that read magical residue the way a dog reads scent, building a picture from fragments. The residue was faint, carefully faint. Whoever had stood here had taken steps to minimize their magical trace, which told him the person was skilled enough to know how to do that and disciplined enough to have done it consistently across multiple visits. They were watching it, Harry said. Or measuring it, Priya said. Both, Luna said from just behind them. She'd moved up quietly enough that neither of them had heard her, which from an Auror meant something. "Look at the ground in front of the prints. There's a pattern. Slight depressions, 5 of them in a consistent geometric arrangement." She crouched beside Harry, close enough that her shoulder was against his arm, and pointed. "Instrument tripod, measuring array." Whoever stood here was taking systematic readings across multiple visits. "Same instrument set up each time," Harry said, seeing it now. "Same height adjustment, look at the tripod depths." She traced them with one finger, not touching the ground. "Consistent operator, same height, same methodology, one person returning to exactly the same position." Caro crouched on Harry's other side. Whatever interdepartmental caution had governed him earlier had been replaced by something that looked a great deal like interest. "That's consistent with a research protocol," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "It's also consistent with someone monitoring a process they've started and want to track." He looked northeast again, past the perimeter across the moorland toward the ridge. The curlew called again, somewhere out there, the same one or another, liquid and unconcerned. "I want to go over that ridge," Harry said. "The perimeter," Caro started. "I'm not leaving the site investigation. I want to take a look at the standing stones and see if there's anything from this side that doesn't appear in your assessments." He stood. "Priya, can you hold things here?" "Obviously," Priya said. "I'm coming with you," Luna said. It wasn't a request, he hadn't expected it to be. The ridge was a 15-minute walk across ground that was damp without being boggy, the heather cropped short by wind and sheep. Luna walked with her instrument in one hand and her journal in the other, somehow managing both without dropping either, taking readings every 100 meters and noting them with 3 words or fewer. Harry walked beside her and watched the approaching ridge and thought about footprints and tripods and a name circled in a notebook. "Voss," he said. "Yes," she said. "You think he was there?" "Or one of his people. The systematic methodology, that's not opportunistic observation. Someone with a research framework visited that site repeatedly with a defined protocol. That's Voss-level discipline. You've never met him. Number, but I've read everything he's published." She paused. "His methodology is," she searched for the word, "elegant, in the way of someone who spent years thinking about one problem from every possible angle. The tripod positions, the geometric arrangement, it's optimal for triangulating resonance direction. It's exactly what I would do." A pause. "It's almost exactly what I have done at the North Sea site." Harry looked at her. "He's not working from the same theory you are." "Number, my theory is observational. I'm trying to understand what the rifts are." She glanced at him. "His is interventional, he's not just watching, he's doing something." The ridge arrived. They crested it together and the standing stones came into view below, 17 of them, arranged in an irregular ellipse on a flat shelf of ground, gray and ancient and absolutely certain of themselves in the way of very old things. Even from 200 meters, Harry could feel the resonance of the place. Not magic he could do anything with, not the responsive, directional magic of his wand or his wandless work. Something older than that. Background magic, the kind that had been there before human beings had learned to use it, that would be there long after. "Category 2 heritage site," he said. "The resonance field is considerable," Luna said, her instrument needle swinging immediately. "Much higher than the rift site. These stones have been accumulating magical field for conservatively 3,000 years, and someone's using that to feed a resonance rift, or testing whether they can." She moved down the slope. Harry followed. Up close, the stones were enormous. The tallest was perhaps 4 meters, leaning slightly east, its surface rough and lichened, carved with markings that predated any magical tradition Harry had studied. He put his hand flat against it. The resonance hummed against his palm, deep, unhurried, something so old it didn't have urgency anymore, just persistence. Luna was moving around the outside of the ellipse, reading her instrument, and then she stopped. Harry was at her side before she said anything. On the inner face of a mid-sized stone, partially concealed by the angle and by a growth of lichen that had been carefully reapplied after the fact, he could see the edges where it had been detached and repressed. There was an inscription. Not ancient, new, carved with precision and intention. A series of symbols that he didn't recognize, but below them in clean, unambiguous standard notation a mathematical expression that was absolutely recognizable. Resonance vectors, frequency values. And an arrow pointing northeast towards Stoatshead Hill with a number beside it. Day 12, Harry crouched. He examined it without touching. He memorized it with the efficiency of 2 years of Auror work. His memory was excellent, had always been excellent, had gotten better under training because you couldn't afford to need parchment in the field. Day 12, he said. Of an ongoing sequence, Luna said. He's been marking days, or one of his people has. The notation style is Voss's, I've seen it in his papers. She crouched beside Harry, her shoulder against his again. She pointed at a symbol in the upper cluster. That's his shorthand for Hallow resonance frequency. He invented it. It doesn't appear in standard notation systems. Only he and people he's taught would use it. Harry looked at her. He was here himself. Yes, they were very close together, both crouched, looking at a series of symbols carved into a 3,000-year-old stone. Harry became aware of the proximity before he chose to become aware of it. The warmth of her beside him in the cold moorland air, the detail of her concentration, the way she was tracing the symbols with her eyes, the way she'd traced her own handwriting in the ministry. Reading the actual text, not just the surface. He stood. She stood a half-second later. We need to get this documented, he said. Photographed, copied, the whole Auror procedure. I've already sketched it, she said, showing him the journal she had. It was exact. Caro needs to see this. Yes, he won't be happy. Harry looked at the stone again. Day 12, 12 days into a sequence with no visible end date. Luna, how many total incidents have there been? Yours and the department's combined. 8 documented. She was already working it out. He could see it in the slight tension at her brow. If the first incident was the start of the sequence and they're occurring at intervals, how long between incidents? Varying. But generally 3 to 6 weeks. If he's on day 12 of a current cycle, the next incident could be within 3 weeks. She met his eyes. Or less if the Stoatshead rift is being actively accelerated. Harry turned and walked back up the ridge at a pace that wasn't quite a run. Luna matched it without commentary. How does he stop them? Harry said as they walked. The rifts, if someone's creating them, there has to be a mechanism, a source, and if there's a source, there's a way to close them. Theoretically, Luna said, slightly breathless now on the uphill though keeping pace, the resonance has to be redirected, not blocked. You can't block Hallow resonance any more than you can block the tide. But you can give it somewhere to go that isn't a fracture point. She looked sideways at him. Which requires something with an affinity for Hallow resonance strong enough to absorb and stabilize it. Harry said nothing. Harry, she said. I know, he said. You survived the killing curse twice. You've carried a Hallow the cloak since you were a child. You held the Elder Wand, the stone. You walked into death and walked back out. Your magical signature has, Luna. I'm not suggesting you do anything dangerous with it, she said. I'm stating what I observe. Your affinity for Hallow resonance is higher than any other living person's. That's not an opinion, it's measurable. A pause. I measured it actually this morning when we were standing at the rift boundary. You were standing next to my instrument. He stopped walking, looked at her. You didn't tell me you were taking readings. You didn't ask, and I thought you might object. I would have objected, I know. She met his gaze entirely unabashed, but the data is accurate. He stood on the moorland hillside looking at her. The wind was coming from the west, pushing strands of hair across her face, and she didn't push them back. She just looked at him with those direct eyes and waited for him to reach the same conclusion she'd arrived at 10 minutes ago and had been patient enough to let him get to himself. You think the only way to close these rifts, he said slowly, is me. I think, she said carefully, that you might be the only person who can close them safely without causing a larger fracture in the process. She paused, which is also probably what Voss thinks. The implication sat between them in the cold air. He's not building a weapon, Harry said. He's building an instrument, and the instrument needs a specific component. He looked at the sky. Me. That's my current theory, Luna said. Yes, Harry laughed, short, not amused. Brilliant. I'm sorry, she said. And she meant it, not performing sympathy but genuinely sorry that the conclusion was this one and not a more convenient one. I've been trying to find an alternative for 3 months. And you're quite irreplaceable apparently. she said it deadpan but with a thread underneath it that wasn't entirely clinical, and he noticed that thread the way you notice a sound that shouldn't be there in a familiar room with the part of your attention that doesn't do it on purpose. He turned and continued up the ridge. "Let's go ruin Caro's day," he said. They ruined Caro's day comprehensively. The man went through 3 distinct phases: disbelief, calculation, and a tight controlled version of alarm that looked like nothing if you didn't know what to look for in about 6 minutes. By the end of it, he was on a communication mirror to the Department of Mysteries, and speaking in the clipped, compressed tones of someone delivering bad news to people who were going to be disappointed in him personally. Harry stepped back and let him handle that and went to find the rift. It was the wrong time, probably. The analysis wasn't finished, the documentation incomplete. Caro would have 16 procedural objections if Harry told him what he was about to do. So Harry didn't tell him. He walked to the boundary edge. Abbott looked up from her instruments with the bright, slightly alarmed expression of a junior Auror who recognized the look on her superior's face and wasn't sure of the protocol for what came next. "Sir," she said, "step back about 10 meters, Abbott." "Sir, the senior Unspeakable said no one should." "I know what he said." Harry kept his voice easy. "Go back 10 meters, stay there, tell me if the resonance readings change." She went. He heard Seamus say something behind him, a low warning, and Priya's quiet response, which was not a protest. Harry stood at the boundary of the rift and looked into it. Up close, the sound he'd noticed earlier was stronger, not heard, felt. That subaudible pressure at the frequency of something deep and structural, like standing near a power source, like the moment before a storm when the air commits to its intention. He reached out with his senses in the way he'd been trained to, past the wand, past the mechanical instinct of learned magic, down to the layer underneath where magic was just a relationship between a person and the world. Some people couldn't get there. Harry had always been there. He didn't know if that was the Hallows or the Horcrux or just himself. He'd stopped worrying about the distinction. He could feel the rift, not see it differently, feel it. The texture of it like a tear in cloth that had been stretched past its tolerance. And beneath that, the direction of pull inward and forward towards something that wasn't here, something it was trying to reach. Without taking his wand out, Harry spoke one word, not a spell, not in any language he'd been taught, something that came from a lower register, the place where his magic lived when it wasn't performing. He wasn't sure what the word was afterward. It was the kind of word that existed in the doing of it, not in the memory of it. The rift stopped, not closed, not reversed, just stilled. The pulse that Abbott's instruments had been tracking on a 40-minute cycle simply ceased mid-count. The light at the boundary went from wrong to merely strange. The drawing sensation in the air, the tide pull inward, quieted, like putting your hand against something vibrating and simply holding it until it found stillness. The silence afterward was complete. The instrument stopped ticking. The wind dropped briefly, coincidentally or not. Even the curlew paused. Then it all came back, the wind, the instruments, the distant sound of Caro still talking urgently into the mirror but different. The rift was still there, but it wasn't doing anything. It sat inside its boundary like something that had been unplugged. Abbott was staring at her readings. "The resonance pulse cycle has stopped," she said, to no one in particular. Seamus appeared at Harry's shoulder. He looked at the rift. He looked at Harry. He did the thing where he started to ask a question and thought better of it. "How?" he eventually said. "Not sure exactly," Harry said honestly. "I'll write it up." "How do you write that up?" "Carefully." Priya came to stand on his other side, reading her own instrument. "Whatever you did," she said, "the signature's clean, no dark magic residue, no rupture, just," she looked at the rift, "just quieter." "It won't hold," Luna said. She'd appeared behind them, journal open, writing rapidly. "The underlying resonance pressure is still there. You've damped it temporarily, but it'll reactivate." She looked up directly at Harry. "How did that feel?" "Like stopping something that wanted to move," he said, "like holding a door. And if you pushed instead of held," he considered. "I don't know, it wanted to go somewhere specific." He frowned. "I didn't want to let it." Luna wrote something. He caught the edge of it. Directional intent confirmed. Source has destination. "What does that mean?" he said. She finished writing before she looked up. "It means the resonance isn't accumulating passively and escaping through fracture points. It's aimed at something." She held his gaze. "Someone is pointing these rifts at a specific location, like lenses focusing light. The sites aren't random." She turned the journal so he could see the map she'd been building, the 8 sites, each marked with a point. Lines drawn from each, trajectories calculated with geometric precision. They all converged on one location. London, the Department of Mysteries. Harry looked at the map, then at Luna. "He's working from inside," he said. "I think he has someone on the inside," she said, "or had." The Orkney site was marked differently. The calculation at that site is more recent than the others. The sequence has accelerated. She tapped the convergence point. Harry, Voss isn't trying to create rifts. I think the rifts are a byproduct. What he's actually trying to do is collect the resonance, Harry said. Funnel it, concentrate it, at the Department of Mysteries where the original Hallow research was done, where the resonance already has the highest density of any location in Britain. She closed the journal, and then do something with it. What? That's what I haven't worked out yet. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, not fear but the specific tension of a person who has followed a thread to its edge and is looking at what's below. But whatever it is, it's what the last 12 days have been building toward. Harry looked north, at the moorland and the sky and the particular indifferent beauty of a place that didn't care what humans were doing in it. Right, he said. He turned to Priya. I need a communication link to Robards, encrypted, now, to Seamus, pack up the monitoring array. We're not leaving instruments out here for Voss's people to interfere with. To Abbott, document everything, every reading, every timestamp before you touch anything else. And then to Caro, who had appeared at the edge of the group with his communication mirror still in hand and an expression that had arrived somewhere beyond its earlier phases. We need access to your department's records on Voss, everything, unclassified and classified both. I can't authorize, Robards can. Harry met his eyes. Get him on the mirror, he'll authorize. He paused. Unless the Department of Mysteries would prefer we solve this without them. Caro looked at the rift, at Harry. At the stilled instruments, the quieted boundary. I'll make the call, he said. Harry nodded once. The case was moving now, the way cases moved when enough pieces aligned, not a walk anymore but something with momentum, with direction, the investigation finding its own gravity. He looked back at Luna, who was watching him with the particular quality of attention she'd been aiming at him since the ministry hallway, since the kitchen in Grimmauld Place, since the moment she'd walked onto Seamus's desk and looked up and found him in the doorway. The quality of someone who has been watching for a long time and has finally, carefully, chosen to let it show. You've been building to this for a year, he said quietly, just to her. Yes, she said, finding the pieces, tracking the sites, all of it. Yes, why didn't you bring it to the ministry sooner? She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the heather around them, the instruments ticked quietly at their new, subdued readings, the investigation hummed forward around them like something alive. Because I wanted to understand it first, she said. Before I handed it to people who might bury the interesting parts in classified folders, a beat. And because I wanted to bring it to you, specifically. The sentence landed simply and without artifice, the way everything she said landed, without decoration, without deflection. Just the thing itself. Harry held it. The way you held something delicate, not gripping, not refusing, just present to the weight of it. Let's get back to the others, he said. Luna nodded. She tucked the journal under her arm and walked ahead of him down the slope, her coat moving in the wind, the coral piece in her braid catching the midday light. He watched her go for exactly 2 seconds before following. 2 seconds was enough to know that whatever the Hallow year had been, whatever that long, muffled 41 steps between rooms feeling had been about, something had just irrevocably started filling it in. He walked down after her, toward the investigation, toward the rift, toward all the complicated, converging things that were beginning to take shape. He did not look at his watch. He didn't need to know what time it was. For the first time in months, he knew exactly where he was. Chapter 3: What the Silver Does. 3 days after Stoatshead Hill, Harry spread 7 years' worth of Aldrich Voss's published research across the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place and made tea for 2 without thinking about it. Luna arrived downstairs at the same time she always did, early enough that the light through the kitchen window was still gray and noncommittal, the city outside not yet decided about the day. She was in a long-sleeved shirt and bare feet, hair loose, and she carried her own journal and a small leather case that clinked faintly when she set it on the table. She looked at the spread of papers without surprise, picked up her tea and sat down across from him. They worked like that for an hour. Mostly silent. The occasional question, the occasional answer, the particular comfortable silence of 2 people thinking in the same direction. Harry had worked with Hermione like this, though Hermione's version involved significantly more audible processing, and with Ron, who contributed to research by being aggressively wrong about things in ways that accidentally clarified the right answer. With Luna it was something different again. Quieter, more lateral. She moved through Voss's papers not linearly but associatively, picking up one, setting it down, picking up another from a different year, holding them next to each other as if reading the space between them. Changed his mind, she said eventually. Harry looked up. When, here, she held up a paper from 4 years ago, and here, a paper from 2 years prior to that. In the earlier work his theory is strictly observational, Hallow resonance as a naturally occurring field phenomenon that accumulates and dissipates in cycles. He's not suggesting intervention, he's building a case for the existence of the resonance field itself, because at this point no one believes it's real. She set them down. But in this one, she held up the later paper, the language changes, it's subtle. He starts describing the resonance not as a natural field but as a resource, available to be directed. What happened between those two papers? Harry said. Luna considered. I think he found evidence that someone had already directed it, once, deliberately. She looked at the papers. I think he found evidence of the original Hallow creation event. Harry leaned back in his chair. The Peverils, or whoever actually made them if it wasn't the Peverils. She said it with the easy pragmatism she applied to mythological questions, the kind that made historians simultaneously love and want to argue with her. Someone created 3 objects that fundamentally altered the magical field of the world. That's not a small act. That's an act that leaves geological traces, you might say. Layers in the resonance record. She opened her leather case. Inside, resting in cut foam, were 6 instruments, modifications of various standard magical measurement tools, all recognizably her own work from the degree to which they'd been taken apart and reassembled with additions. I think Voss found those traces, and I think finding them convinced him that what was done once could be done again. He wants to create a Hallow, Harry said. She took out the compass thermometer from the moor and a second instrument Harry didn't recognize, a slender rod of silver with a small sphere at one end that was currently dark. I don't think he wants to create one. I think he wants to reunite the existing resonance, the field that was split when the Hallows were separated. She held up the silver rod. 3 objects made together in resonance with each other, then separated first by time, then by death, then by deliberate choice. She looked at him. Your choice at the end. You buried the wand, you let the stone go, you kept the cloak. A pause. Each of those acts sent a pulse of Hallow resonance into the ambient field, like a bell being struck. The sound is still propagating, and the rifts are where the propagation is interfering with itself, where the waves from those 3 acts cross each other. She set the silver rod on the table between them. Harry, Voss is trying to intercept those waves before they cancel each other out. He wants to collect the resonance at a point of maximum coherence, and she paused. And essentially recrystallize it, not into the original Hallows, into something new, a unified field object that contains the combined resonance of all 3. Harry looked at the silver rod. A 4th Hallow, he said. Or the original one, she said quietly, the one that was broken into 3. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, London produced its usual morning sounds. Traffic, a distant siren, someone's bins being collected with the particular percussive enthusiasm of early Tuesday mornings. The ordinary noise of a city that had no idea what was being discussed at one of its kitchen tables. He thinks this would close the rifts, Harry said. Yes, and he's probably right. She met his eyes. The rifts are a symptom of the resonance having nowhere coherent to go. If it were gathered and stabilized into a single object, the interference patterns would resolve. The rifts would close. She paused. The problem is not his goal. The problem is the method. The method requires something to act as a nucleus for the crystallization, something with an existing affinity for all 3 Hallow resonances simultaneously. She looked at him steadily. Which is why I said you're irreplaceable. Harry thought about the standing stone. Day 12. He thought about the convergence point on Luna's map. He thought about the 40-minute pulse of the rift and how it had felt to still it, like holding a door, like being the place where something vast and restless finally rested its weight. If Voss uses me as the nucleus, Harry said carefully, what happens to me? Luna didn't look away. She didn't soften the answer and she didn't dramatize it. She just said it, unknown, it's never been attempted. The resonance load would be extraordinary. You might be able to sustain it, you might not. She picked up the silver rod. He would argue that your particular history with the Hallows means you would sustain it, that you're uniquely suited. Would you argue that? A pause. Something moved across her face, brief, controlled, but there. No, she said, because the argument treats you as an instrument and you're not. The sentence was quiet and absolute, the way she said most things that mattered. Harry held it for a moment and the held thing had weight. Show me the silver rod, he said. She held it out. He took it and immediately felt the resonance. Not passive, not ambient, directed. The sphere at the end lit faintly, a cold silver blue, and the sensation in his hand was the same as the rift at Stoat's Head Hill, the same as the elder wand in his grip, the same as the stone in his palm in the dark before the forest. Old, structural, the frequency of something that had been waiting. What is this? He said. My own instrument. I made it in Iceland. She watched the sphere. It responds to Hallow resonance, specifically to anyone with strong affinity for it. I've tested it on myself on 6 other people with varying degrees of hallow exposure. She nodded at the sphere. It's never done that for anyone else. How bright was it? Dark, she said, for everyone else. Harry looked at the sphere. The cold light pulsed gently against his palm, steady as a heartbeat, and he thought about the word she'd used, nucleus. He thought about what it would mean to be the center of something gathering, whether it was a choice or a fact, and whether those were different in this particular situation. He set the rod down. The light faded gradually. We need to find Voss before day 12 becomes whatever comes after it, he said. Day 12 of the current cycle was yesterday, Luna said, based on the marking at the standing stones. He looked at her. What comes on day 13? I don't know. She picked up the rod and returned it to the case. But I know the Orkney site had the highest resonance readings of any location, and it's the most recent, which means he's approaching completion, Harry said. Yes. He pushed back from the table, stood, and went to the window. The street below was doing its ordinary business, a woman walking a dog, a postman, a child on a bicycle too large for them being walked by a nervous parent. The London that had no idea, that would have no idea if they handled this correctly. Hermione, he said. Already written to her, Luna said. Yesterday from the moor, she'll have received it by now. He turned. What did you tell her? Everything, all of it. She met his look calmly. I know you like to manage information carefully. But Hermione is the best magical theorist I know, and we need the best magical theorist we know. So I told her everything, and she'll write back with 17 qualifications and 1 or 2 ideas that are better than anything either of us has come up with. He couldn't argue with the logic. He tried anyway briefly in his head, and confirmed that he couldn't. All right, he said, we also need Robards to get us the Voss file. Caro was going to authorize it. Caro was going to try to authorize it and then run into 8 layers of classification and spend a week writing justification memos. He picked up his wand from the counter and pocketed it. I'll go to the ministry directly, talk to the head of the Unspeakables. Luna raised an eyebrow. They'll let you in, probably not voluntarily, he shrugged. But I've been in the Department of Mysteries before, twice. They generally accept the precedent by this point. The Department of Mysteries was, as always, profoundly uninterested in being visited. The black circular room with its identical doors rotated when Harry entered, which was expected. What was less expected was that it rotated, and then stopped with one particular door directly in front of him, as if making a suggestion. He opened it. Beyond was a room he hadn't been in before, not the brain room, not the time room, not the death chamber with its veil that still pulled at something in him whenever he was anywhere near this level of the ministry. This room was smaller. The walls were lined with instruments, hundreds of them, floor to ceiling in glass cases. Measuring devices of extraordinary variety and age. Gauges, rods, spheres, compass arrays, astrolabes modified for magical measurement. The air had the particular density of a room, where very precise things had been happening for a very long time. At the center of the room, sitting at a desk surrounded by parchment and apparently unsurprised by Harry's arrival, was a small woman of approximately 70 who looked like someone had compacted the entirety of human intellectual history into a body that had decided to stop caring about its own height. Mr. Potter, she said, without looking up from her work. You're 40 minutes earlier than I expected. Harry stopped. You expected me. Caro told me you were coming yesterday. He said you'd circumvent the official request process and come directly, which told me you were either impatient or smart. Either way, I thought it was better to be here. She looked up. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and extremely tired in the way of people who had been paying very close attention to difficult things for a very long time. I'm Senior Unspeakable Oduya. Sit down. He sat. The Voss file, he said, is in front of you, she said. There was indeed a folder on the corner of the desk nearest him. He picked it up. It was thick. Aldrich Voss resigned 18 months ago, Oduya said, returning to her work as she spoke, reading something and making notes without pausing for him. He submitted a research proposal to this department 4 years ago, the Unified Resonance Theory. We classified it as Level 4 Speculative, which is our category for things that are probably true and we'd rather not have to act on. She turned a page. He accepted that classification, continued his research privately. We monitored his publications and his correspondence for the first 6 months after his resignation as procedure dictates, found nothing actionable. She paused. We stopped monitoring 18 months ago, Harry said. Yes. When did the first rift appear? A beat. 16 months ago, she said. In Sweden. Harry looked up from the folder. Oduya was still writing, but the set of her shoulders had changed slightly, something that had been very controlled becoming fractionally less so. Sweden isn't on Luna Lovegood's list, he said. We classified that incident separately, predating our definition framework. She set her pen down. Mr. Potter. I am going to tell you several things that I would ordinarily not tell an Auror because the situation has progressed beyond the point where departmental protocol serves any useful purpose. She looked at him directly. Her dark eyes were extraordinary, deeply tired, and entirely undaunted. Voss did not leave this department on bad terms. He left because we told him his theory was dangerous and we would not fund its practical application. He agreed with our assessment of the danger. He disagreed with our conclusion about what to do with it. He thinks the danger of inaction is worse than the danger of action, Harry said. Yes, and he may be right. She let that land before continuing. The resonance accumulation is not indefinite. Based on our current models, the ambient Hallow resonance field will reach critical density within. She glanced at a specific instrument on the wall, 14 to 18 months. At which point the interference patterns will generate rifts not of meters but of kilometers. Not isolated disturbances but cascading fractures, across the entire magical field of Britain and propagating outward. Harry sat very still. You're saying the rifts aren't the problem, he said. The rifts are the warning. Yes, and Voss knows this. Voss calculated it before we did. She said it without visible ego. He came to us with that calculation and a proposed solution. We said the solution was too dangerous. He resigned and went to pursue it anyway. A pause. I think he is 3 to 4 weeks from attempting the crystallization process. The unified field object, Harry said. Oduya looked at him. The look was very precise. He told you that? Luna Lovegood worked it out from his published papers. The senior Unspeakable was quiet for a moment. Then, she's extraordinarily gifted, that young woman. Yes, Harry said, and you trust her. It wasn't a question with much uncertainty in it. Completely, he said. Oduya nodded once, the decisive nod of someone rearranging a file structure in their mind. The nucleus problem, she said, you know about that. That he needs someone with Hallow affinity as the focal point. Yes. And you know it's you. It's occurred to me, yes. She looked at him with a kind of measured gravity, not pity, not drama. Just the weight of a very experienced person looking at a young man who has, once again, found himself at the center of something very large. Mr. Potter, Voss will not approach you openly. He'll try to engineer circumstances, put you in proximity to a prepared resonance site and trigger the process before you can. He'd need me conscious and willing, Harry said. The affinity doesn't work under coercion. The Elder Wand proved that. Magic that comes from Hallow resonance requires genuine consent. Oduya blinked once. How do you know that? Because I've been thinking about it since Tuesday. He stood. He can't trap me. He needs me to choose it. He picked up the Voss file. Which means his only viable strategy is to convince me that it's necessary. And is he wrong? She said. Harry stopped. He didn't answer immediately. He turned the question over, held it up the way Luna held 2 papers next to each other, reading the space between them. The 14 to 18 months, the cascading fractures, the propagating rifts across the magical field of Britain. I'll let you know, he said. He walked out. The circular room rotated when he returned to it. The correct door presented itself again, helpfully, and he went back the way he'd come. Luna was in the Auror bullpen when he returned, sitting across from Priya at Priya's desk. The two of them bent over something that looked like a jointly constructed diagram. Seamus was at his own desk making notes. The atmosphere in the room was the productive, slightly pressurized kind that Harry associated with cases that had found their own momentum. He set the Voss file on the central table. Full file, authorized by Oduya herself. Priya looked up. How'd you manage that? She was expecting me, Harry said. He sat down. She also told me the rifts are a symptom of something worse. 14 to 18 months before the resonance field hits critical density and we get cascading fractures across Britain. He said it cleanly without build-up. Fast and direct because the team needed the information, not the drama of its delivery. Voss isn't the villain of this. He's trying to prevent that. His method is the problem. Seamus set down his quill. What's his method? He wants to crystallize the ambient resonance into a stable, unified field object. Stop the interference patterns before they cascade. Harry paused. The process requires a nucleus, something with sufficient Hallow affinity to anchor the crystallization. The room understood. He could see it arriving in each of them at different speeds. Priya immediately, Seamus a beat later, the 2 junior Aurors exchanging a glance. You, Seamus said, me. And if he manages to use you as the nucleus before you consent to it, he can't. The resonance requires genuine consent. Coercion doesn't work. The magical field won't respond to it. Harry met Seamus's eyes. His only move is to try to convince me. Has he tried? Not yet. Luna, who had been silent since Harry arrived, finally spoke. He will soon. She hadn't looked up from the diagram. Look at this. She turned it so Harry could see. She and Priya had been cross-referencing the site locations with something topographical data, overlaid with what Harry recognized as magical survey maps, the kind the Ministry maintained for heritage site classifications. The convergence point on the Department of Mysteries, that's the final destination for the collected resonance, but the path it takes to get there isn't random. The sites are arranged in a specific pattern. She traced it with one finger, a funnel. The resonance is being directed not just toward London but toward a specific chamber within the Department of Mysteries. The Death Chamber, Harry said. She looked at him. Yes, because of the Veil. Because the Veil is the single existing structure in Britain that already has a stable relationship with Hallow resonance. It's been accumulating that relationship for centuries, probably, since it was created. She set the finger down. It's the most natural focal point for a crystallization event. It can handle the load in a way that no other structure can, Priya said, so Voss needs to be in the Death Chamber, with Harry. And with enough accumulated resonance channeled in from all 8 sites simultaneously. 9 sites, Luna corrected. He'll need a 9th to complete the geometric pattern. The funnel isn't closed yet, there's a gap. She pointed at the map. Here. Northeast Scotland, near Inverness, it's the only location that completes the array geometrically. She looked at Harry. He hasn't opened a rift there yet, but he will. That'll be day 13. The room was quiet. Harry looked at the map. At the funnel shape, the 8 points in the empty space in Northeast Scotland and at the center where all the lines went. How long do we have, he said. If he opens the Inverness site and the cycle continues at current pace. She looked at her calculations. 11 days, perhaps 12. All right. Harry stood. Priya, I need you to go to Inverness, not to stop anything, to observe and document. If Voss or his people show up to open a site, I want to know the minute it happens. He looked at Seamus. Get me everything you can find on Voss's known associates, people he worked with at the Department of Mysteries, people he published with, anyone named in his research acknowledgements. He looked at the junior Aurors. Pull every heritage site record within 10 kilometers of each rift location. Cross-reference with anything unusual in the past 2 years, purchases, permits, incidents. They moved, the efficient, purposeful movement of people who have something real to do. Luna remained at the table, adding to her diagram. Harry came to stand beside her. You're not assigning me a task, she said. You're already doing yours, he said. She smiled slightly, not looking up. He looked at the diagram, at the funnel, the 9 points, the center. At the death chamber which he'd been in once at 15 years old and which he had returned to only in nightmares since, standing at the archway, watching the veil move in air that shouldn't have been moving, hearing voices and losing Sirius through it like losing a light that couldn't be recovered. Luna, he said. Yes. The veil, when we were at the Ministry in the battle, you said you could hear them, the people on the other side. She was still for a moment, her pen stopped. Yes. Could you still hear them, if you went back now? She considered it properly, the way she considered everything, not deflecting, not being falsely modest about something that was simply true. I don't know, I was 16. Grief makes you more permeable, I think, to things like that. She paused. Why? He picked up the silver rod from her case where she'd left it on the table. It lit immediately, the cold, silver blue, steady as before. If Voss's plan involves the veil as the focal point for crystallization, he said, and if the veil already has a stable Hallow resonance, what happens to the people on the other side when a crystallization event occurs? Luna looked at the rod. At the light in the sphere, then at him, and her expression had shifted, still clear, still direct, but with something underneath it now, something that had heard the question and followed it all the way to its end. I hadn't thought about that, she said. I have, Harry said. Since Oduya mentioned the death chamber, I've been thinking about it. He set the rod down, the light faded slowly. We don't know what the veil is really, we know it's a threshold. We know there are people on the other side, or something that used to be people, or something adjacent. We know magic responds to it in a specific way. He looked at the map. If you run a crystallization event through a threshold, through something that exists between states, the resonance might propagate through it, Luna said quietly, into whatever's on the other side. Yes, which could be catastrophic, Harry said, or it could be nothing. We have no idea what's on the other side of the veil. Voss might know, or he might not care, Harry said, because his calculation is about the living world, about stopping the rifts before they cascade. He might have decided that whatever exists beyond the veil isn't a consideration because it's not, he stopped. Not real, Luna said, not measurable, not something he can put in a research paper. Luna picked up her pen. She didn't write anything, just held it. Looking at the map with that expression she had when something had moved from theoretical to personal, the shift that sometimes happened when she let you see that her extraordinary detachment from ordinary human reaction was not indifference but choice. My mother, she said. Harry said nothing. He waited. She died when I was 9, experimenting with a spell. She looked at the diagram. For a very long time I believed she was somewhere on the other side of the veil. I still believe it, actually. I've just become less certain about the nature of what somewhere means. A breath. I heard voices there. When we were in the death chamber. She looked at him finally. I don't know if one of them was hers. I've never been able to decide if not knowing is better or worse. Luna, he said. It's all right, she said, and she wasn't devastated, wasn't asking for comfort. She was just placing a fact on the table the way she placed all facts because it was relevant and she was someone who dealt in relevance regardless of cost. I'm telling you because if Voss's process might affect whatever's on the other side of the veil, that's a reason to stop him that goes beyond the practical. She met his eyes. And you were already going to stop him, but now you know why I will as well. He held her gaze, she held his. The moment had the quality of something being decided not by words, not by any formal action, but by the fact of two people looking at each other across a table full of evidence and being completely on the same side. We stop him, Harry said. Yes, Luna said, but we also, he hesitated. We need to solve the actual problem. If Voss is right about the critical density, 14 to 18 months, then we need a different solution to the resonance problem. She was already writing. One that doesn't require you as a nucleus and doesn't use the veil as a focal point, she wrote without pausing. I've been thinking about it since Tuesday as well, actually. And she looked up. What if the resonance doesn't need to be concentrated? What if it needs to be redistributed? She turned the journal so he could see. A diagram different from the funnel, this one radiating outward from a central point like light from a source, spreading evenly across a wide field. Rather than gathering it into a single object, disperse it deliberately across a sufficiently large magical field. Thin it out. Reduce the interference density below the threshold where it can cause fractures. A broadcast instead of a crystallization, Harry said. Yes. The magical signature would need to be compatible, something that resonates with the Hallow field but can also interface with the larger ambient magical field of Britain. She tapped the diagram. Something like the ley line network, the same structure that the standing stones were built on. If we could access a major convergence point, Stonehenge, Harry said. She looked at him. Yes, exactly. The largest ley line convergence in Britain. If we could introduce a controlled Hallow resonance broadcast at Stonehenge, the ley network would carry it, distribute it evenly. She paused. It would still require someone with strong Hallow affinity to initiate, but not as the nucleus, more as the broadcaster, Harry said. Yes, the difference is, she searched, the difference between being a vessel and being a voice. She held his gaze. One contains the resonance, one directs it outward. Harry thought about the rift at Stoat's Head Hill. The word that had come from the low register, from the place where his magic lived when it wasn't performing. The way it had stilled the pulse not by containing it but by giving it a direction. By being the place it could orient to, and then letting it rest. He thought about the difference between a vessel and a voice. Does this work? He said. Theoretically, does the math support it? I've been running calculations since Thursday, she said. The math supports it. I can't be certain until I know the specific resonance density across all 9 sites, which requires Priya's Inverness readings. She met his eyes. But yes, I think it works. And Voss would need to be convinced or stopped. She looked at the map. I'd prefer the first option. So would I. He leaned on the table, looking at the diagram, at the radiating lines. At the even distribution of something that had been accumulating in one direction and needed to be given somewhere else to go. At the center of it, where the broadcast would originate, the point of first contact. If this works, he said, the rift's close. Yes, and the people on the other side of the veil are unaffected, she said, because we're not using the veil at all. He straightened. He looked at Luna, really looked at her with the full attention he usually deployed on problems and cases and very occasionally people, and saw what he'd been half-seeing since the Auror bullpen, since the kitchen, since the moor. The extraordinary precision of her. Not just the intelligence but the courage of it, the consistent, unsentimental willingness to follow every thread to its true end, regardless of what was at the other end waiting. The willingness to look at the things that were hardest and not look away. When did you work out the redistribution theory? He said. The framework occurred to me in Tibet, she said. The monk's words, the space between stars being the memory of light that has moved on. She looked at the diagram. Light doesn't stop existing when it leaves its source, it distributes, it becomes the background illumination of everything. She paused. Hallow resonance doesn't need to be concentrated. It needs to be let go. Harry said nothing for a moment, then he picked up the Voss file and tucked it under his arm. I'm going to read this tonight, he said, all of it. I want to understand his methodology well enough to talk to him directly when we find him. He's not going to be easy to talk to, she said. Number he spent 2 years being certain he's right. Harry moved toward the door. But the math on your theory is better than his, and he's a mathematician. He looked back at her. He'll recognize it if we show him. Luna capped her pen. That's a very optimistic read of someone who's been operating in isolation for 18 months. Probably, Harry admitted, but I'd rather arrive at that conversation assuming he's reachable and be wrong than assume he's not and not try. He met her eyes across the room. That's been my approach to difficult people since I was 11. The corner of her mouth moved. It's a good approach, she said. It's why you talked to me at 14 when everyone else at school thought I was mad. He stopped. He hadn't thought about that in years, the first time they'd properly spoken on the Hogwarts Express in 4th year. He'd been looking for a compartment, and every compartment had been full or hostile or occupied by people he didn't want to explain himself to. Luna's compartment had been almost empty, and she'd looked up at him with those clear eyes and said quite calmly, "You can sit down if you want, I'm not saving this for anyone, most people prefer not to share a compartment with me." He'd sat down. They'd talked for most of the journey. He hadn't told Ron and Hermione, not because he was ashamed but because it was one of those conversations that belonged entirely to the space it happened in. "I didn't think you were mad," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I remember it." He left. Down the corridor, past Seamus's notes and Priya's empty desk and the junior Aurors pulling heritage site records. Out into the Ministry atrium, up through the levels, out into London, the file under his arm and the diagram in his mind and the cold light of the silver sphere behind his eyes, steady as a heartbeat. He walked 3 blocks before he stopped on a pavement corner and just stood. The ordinary London afternoon moved around him. People, pigeons, a bus, someone arguing on a mobile phone about something that mattered very much to them. The sky was the complicated gray-blue of a city that had given up predicting its own weather. He thought about Ginny, about the phone call. Is everything all right with us? He thought about 41 steps and differently numbered results. He thought about what it meant to be a voice instead of a vessel, to let something go outward rather than hold it in. He stood there for another 30 seconds. Then he walked home slowly, reading the Voss file as he walked, his lips moving slightly on the densest passages, a habit from 7th year and Horcrux research that he'd never managed to break. The file was extraordinary. Voss was extraordinary, the clarity of his thinking, the rigor of his methodology, the absolute conviction of a man who had sat with a single enormous problem for years, until he understood it well enough to be genuinely dangerous. Harry read and understood and felt a deep, complicated respect for a man he had not yet met and was going to have to stop. He also found on page 43 of the file a notation in Voss's own hand that had been added after the main text. A single line underscored twice. The nucleus must consent. Consent must be genuine. There is no other way. Harry stopped walking. Read it again. Voss had already worked this out. He knew he couldn't trap or coerce. He'd known it from the beginning. Which meant his plan was never to force Harry into anything. His plan was to present the situation, the resonance, the critical density, the cascading fractures, the inevitable catastrophe, and let Harry choose. He built his entire strategy around the assumption that, presented with the facts, Harry Potter would do what Harry Potter always did: sacrifice himself. Harry stood on the pavement with that realization and felt something clarify inside him, not anger, not fear, but a very specific, calm resolve. The kind that came not from heroic decision-making but from simply knowing with complete certainty what you were not going to do. He was not going to be the instrument of someone else's solution. He was going to find his own. He walked the rest of the way home and went directly to the kitchen and began working on the redistribution calculations because they needed to be right, they needed to be irrefutable, and he had 11 days. Possibly 12. Chapter 4. The weight of a Weasley's eyes. Ginny arrived at Grimmauld Place on a Wednesday evening without calling ahead, which she'd always done when training ran short, and the Harpies released the team early, and she'd rather be somewhere familiar than her own flat, which she'd kept for the season, and which Harry had always thought was a sign of something neither of them had been ready to name yet. She had her training bag over one shoulder and her boots in her hand, the way she carried them when her feet hurt, and she let herself in with the key she'd had for 2 years, and she walked down the hall toward the kitchen following the light. Luna was at the table. Not alone, Harry was there too, across from her, and Seamus's notes were spread between them, and there were 3 empty mugs and a 4th still steaming, and the atmosphere in the room was the specific atmosphere of 2 people who have been working so long in the same space that the space has taken on the shape of their combined attention. There were papers everywhere. Luna's journal was open. its pages covered in diagrams that Harry had clearly been annotating in his own hand. She could see his cramped, left-leaning scrawl in the margins, asking questions and occasionally answering them. Luna's answers to those were written below in her own precise hand, a dialogue conducted in ink across someone else's pages, the kind of comfortable boundary crossing that assumed an intimacy of purpose so complete that the material boundary of your notebook had simply ceased to be relevant. Ginny stood in the doorway for 4 seconds. She counted them without intending to. Then she walked in and set her boots by the door and her bag on the floor and said, "Hiya," and went to the kettle. Harry looked up. "Gin, hey, I didn't know you were coming. Training ended early. Gwenog's got a bad knee." She filled the kettle, kept her back to the room for the moment it took to arrange her expression into something entirely normal. "Luna, I didn't know you were back in London." "About a week now," Luna said. Her voice was light, easy, exactly what it always was. There was nothing in her tone that required reacting to. There never was with Luna, which Ginny thought was the thing about Luna that was the most quietly extraordinary and sometimes the most difficult to deal with. "We've been working rather late. Harry forgot to eat dinner again." "He always forgets to eat dinner," Ginny said. "I know," Harry said. "I did eat lunch though." "At 2:30, Luna said, not looking up from the diagram she was correcting. "That's still lunch." Ginny poured her tea and sat down at the end of the table at the edge of the paper spread in the place that was neither their working space nor outside the room. She looked at the diagrams. She didn't understand them. Ginny was excellent at magic, practical and intuitive and physically gifted in a way that Harry always admired, but theoretical magical cartography with resonance calculations had never been her area and she didn't pretend otherwise. "How's the case?" she said. Harry looked at her properly for the first time since she'd sat down, that particular quality of attention he had when he was shifting between the case and the non-case world, like a man stepping back through a door and waiting for his eyes to adjust. "Moving," he said. "We've got a clearer picture now. The rift at Stoat's Head isn't isolated, there's a network of them, 9 sites all connected. What's causing them?" he explained. "The Hallow resonance vast the critical density, the funnel toward the Department of Mysteries." He explained it the way he briefed, clear, sequenced, without drama, and Ginny listened the way she always listened, with the focused athlete's attention to pattern and implication that had always made her a better tactician than people expected. When he finished, she looked at the diagrams on the table. "And this is your alternative," she said, "to his crystallization plan." "Luna's alternative, technically," Harry said, "which Harry has been improving," Luna said, still not looking up. "Collaboratively," Harry said. Ginny looked at them both. She took a sip of tea. "So what's the timeline?" she said. 11 days maybe, before he opens the final site." Harry leaned back in his chair, rolling tension out of his shoulders. He needed a shower. He needed 8 hours of sleep. Ginny had known him long enough to read the specific configuration of his tiredness. This one was the good kind, the kind that came from work that had demanded things and received them, the kind he'd had after every important mission she'd ever seen him come back from. "We're still waiting on Priya's readings from Inverness. Once we have those, Luna can finalize the redistribution calculations and we'll know if the plan is viable." "You think it is?" Ginny said. "Yes," Harry said. "So does Hermione," Luna added. "She wrote back this afternoon, 17 qualifications, 2 better ideas and a revised calculation on the ley line distribution coefficient." She held up a sheet of parchment covered in Hermione's dense, urgent handwriting. "She's very excited. She's trying to hide it, but the handwriting gets faster when she's excited." Ginny almost laughed. She caught it and let a smaller version out instead. "Right. And what does Ron think?" "He thinks Hermione is being dramatic and should get some sleep," Luna said. He added a note at the bottom. It said, "Tell Potter to be careful, also hi Luna." Harry smiled, genuine, relaxed, the smile Ginny had fallen for at 15. She'd seen it progressively less over the last 8 months and had been trying, carefully, not to catalog its absences. She saw it now and looked down at her tea. They ate, or rather Luna produced something from the refrigerator that turned out to be a very good pasta that she'd apparently made earlier in the day and left. And Harry ate it with the focused enthusiasm of a person who had indeed forgotten dinner. And Ginny ate hers and watched the conversation across the table without participating much because the conversation had a texture and rhythm that was its own thing, that had been assembled over the past week in her absence. And inserting herself felt less like joining and more like interrupting something with its own internal logic. They talked about Voss, they talked about the ley lines. They talked about a theory Luna had about the pre-Roman standing stones and their relationship to the original ley network, which Harry followed with genuine engagement, asking the right questions at the right moments, not the questions of someone politely interested but the questions of someone who had spent enough time with the material to know where the interesting corners were. Ginny knew Harry's questions. She knew the difference between his polite engagement and his genuine engagement. She had always known. She watched him ask about ley line interference and resonance distribution, and felt the knowledge settle in her like something that had been arriving for a long time and had finally come to rest. After dinner, Luna said she was going to Priya's flat to compare notes, gathered her things with the unhurried efficiency that characterized all her movements, and left. She said goodnight to Ginny with the same direct warmth she always had, the kind that didn't have an agenda in it, that was just warmth offered without performance. Ginny said goodnight and listened to the front door close. The kitchen in the quiet after Luna's departure had a particular quality, not uncomfortable, just present. Harry was clearing the plates, his back to her, the small domestic actions he'd never been particularly good at but had learned to do reliably because living alone had required it. She's brilliant, Ginny said. She is, Harry said. He didn't turn around. The redistribution theory is hers. She'd worked out the framework before I was involved. I've been helping with the application. But the core insight was hers. Yes, Ginny set her mug down. She looked at the table, at the papers, at the diagrams, at the margin notes, at the dialogue in two different hands. Harry, she said. He turned then. He was holding a dish towel and the specific expression of a man who could tell from a tone of voice that a conversation was beginning that he could neither avoid nor adequately prepare for. Not dread exactly, more like the particular steadiness of someone standing at the edge of something high. Gin, he said. Sit down, she said. Please. He sat. She looked at him across the table. She was 20 years old, which was not old, but she had grown up in the war in the specific way that Weasleys grew up in the war, fast, without permission, with love as the primary structural material and fear as the weather you operated in regardless. She had flown a broomstick in combat. She had stunned Death Eaters at 16. She had watched her brother die and come back and had held her family together through the specific Weasley method of being loud and warm enough that grief couldn't quite find room to settle permanently. She knew her own mind. She had always known her own mind, which was perhaps her most essential characteristic, the one her mother had sometimes treated as a problem and her father had always recognized as a gift. She knew it now. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to tell me the truth, not the version that protects me from something, the actual truth. Harry set the dish towel on the table. All right, he said. Are you in love with Luna? The question arrived without drama. Ginny had said it quietly as a question with a genuine interrogative at its center, not an accusation, not a crisis, just the actual thing she needed to know, asked directly because she had never in her life benefited from asking things indirectly. Harry looked at her. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere upstairs the old house settled. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the table and then back at her. I don't know, he said. Ginny waited. I'm not saying it to protect you, he said. I genuinely don't know. Something is, he stopped, started again. Something has shifted. I don't know when it started, maybe it's always been there and I didn't, he stopped again, his jaw moved. I'm sorry, Gin, don't apologize yet, she said. I haven't told you what I think. He looked at her. She picked up her mug though the tea was cold, something to do with her hands. I've been watching you for 8 months, she said. Not watching like not suspiciously, just watching you because I know you. I've known you since you fell off your first broom at our house and tried to act like it was intentional. The corner of her mouth moved. You've been somewhere else, not physically, you've been here, you've been present, you've been, she searched for it. You've been performing present, the way you perform okay when you're not okay, the way you smile at people you love when you're too tired to actually be there for them. She set the mug down. I've been watching that and trying to decide whether it was the war, the aftermath, the grief, all the things you never properly processed, or whether it was something else. Harry was very still. In the past week, she said, you've been differently. I noticed it on the phone 2 days ago, and tonight watching you, you've been there. Actually there, not performing it, she looked at him. Luna came back and you came back. He looked at the table. That's not nothing, Ginny said. That's the opposite of nothing. Gin, I'm not finished. She wasn't unkind. She wasn't performing bravery either. This wasn't a performance, which was what made it so difficult and so right. I love you. I have loved you since I was 11 years old, which is obviously far too young to understand what love is, but the version of it I grew into is real and it's mine and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. She looked at him steadily. But I've also been sitting across the table from the version of you that shows up when Luna's in the room. And I have loved you long enough and well enough to know the difference between the man I've been living with for the past 8 months and the man you just were for the past 3 hours. Harry's throat moved. They're not the same, she said. The statement landed between them. Harry didn't challenge it because it was true and they both knew it, and he had the kind of fundamental honesty that prevented him from disputing true things, even when disputing them would have been kinder to himself. "I don't know what to do with this," he said. "I know," Ginny said. "Neither do I, but I'd rather know what's actually true than go on pretending I don't see it," she exhaled. "That's not a life I want to live, pretending not to see things. You've never been any good at that," he said, and it was tender, not critical. "Terrible at it," she confirmed. "Always have been." A pause. "Mum says it's my worst quality." "It's one of your best," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The look between them was long and honest and had all the history they carried together in it, the flying lessons and the order and the war and the years after the trying. All of it. "Are we?" he started. "I don't know," she said. "Not tonight. It's too much to decide tonight, and I won't pretend to know what I want from this conversation at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday when I just got off a 4-hour training session and found you annotating another woman's notebook." She said it without real bitterness. The slight edge of it was just the honest residue of what it had felt like standing in the doorway for those 4 seconds before she'd arranged herself. "I need time to think." "Of course," he said. "And you need to be honest with yourself before you're honest with anyone else," she said. "Including me, including her." She met his eyes. "Do that first. Whatever the answer is, do that first." He nodded. She stood. She picked up her bag and her boots and she walked to the hallway. Then she stopped without turning around. "Harry," she said. "Yeah, the case, the Voss situation, be careful." "Always," he said. "You never are," she said. "But try." She let herself out. He listened to the door close and then to the street outside, her footsteps quick and certain, the sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going even when they didn't. A car passing, the city's indifferent hum. He sat at the table for a very long time. He did not sleep. He didn't try, after an hour of lying in the dark, arriving at the same place repeatedly, not the hollow insomnia of the past months but something more active, a mind that had been given a question it needed to work rather than avoid. At 2 in the morning he went downstairs and made tea and sat with the Voss file and tried to read it. Managed 4 pages before he set it down. He thought about what Ginny had said. "The man you just were for the past 3 hours." He thought about the first time he'd met Luna, the Hogwarts Express 4th year, the compartment she'd offered without asking what he needed from her, which was what he'd needed. He thought about the DA, about Luna saying nargles and meaning loyalty, about the way she'd fought at the ministry at 16 with the calm of someone who had already decided what they were willing to sacrifice and was at peace with that decision. He thought about Malfoy's dungeon, about the dark and the months of it, and how Luna had kept talking, small and specific and real, because talking was the thing she could do and she'd done it without stopping, without making a performance of her own endurance, simply present, simply there. He thought about the moor, about her shoulder against his arm in the cold moorland air, crouching at the stone. About Harry's back, written in the margin in her small, precise hand. He thought about the silver rod and the cold light in the sphere. He got up, went to the cupboard where he kept it. She'd left it in his care without making a point of it, just put it on the counter when she left for Priya's flat and picked it up. The light came immediately. Silver blue, steady, pulsing gently at the frequency of something very old. He'd held the Elder Wand and it had felt like being addressed by something vast and impersonal. He'd held the Resurrection Stone and it had felt like grief given material form. The cloak always felt like being held by something he couldn't see. This, the light in the silver sphere, felt different. It felt like recognition. Not "you are the one chosen for this," not "you are bound to this by fate and circumstance," just recognition. The way a room feels different when someone who knows you walks in. He set it down. The light faded slowly, reluctantly, by degrees. He went back to bed. This time he slept. The morning produced Hermione. Not in person. Hermione arrived as a communication mirror call at 8:45. Her face occupying the mirror's surface with the intensity of someone who had not slept much but was powered by the specific fuel of a genuinely interesting problem. "Right," she said before Harry had fully sat down with his tea. "The redistribution coefficient. Luna's calculation was right but conservative. I've run it 3 different ways and each time I get a higher coefficient, which is actually good news because it means the lay network can carry more resonance than she estimated. The broadcast from Stonehenge would propagate across the entire British lay network in," she checked her notes, "approximately 72 hours. 3 days of progressive distribution and the ambient resonance density should be below fracture threshold." "That's better than we thought," Harry said. "Yes, but," she always had a but. The but was often the most important part. "The initiation, Harry, the broadcast requires whoever initiates it to sustain the connection for the full duration of the first resonance pulse, which I estimate at," she checked again, "approximately 4 minutes. How much resonance load is that?" Significant. Hermione's expression did the thing where it was trying to be calm and not quite getting there. Luna's calculations suggest the load would be equivalent to approximately. She stopped. Harry, it's a lot. You've sustained high resonance loads before, the killing curse, the wand confrontation, but this would be sustained rather than instantaneous. Sustained at the same level. Number lower amplitude, but for longer. She looked at him. Think of it as the difference between a very heavy weight dropped on you and a somewhat heavy weight held on you for 4 minutes. I can hold something heavy for 4 minutes, Hermione. I know you can, she said. I'm not saying you can't, I'm saying we need to be certain mathematically before we try, because if the connection drops mid-broadcast, the resonance rebounds, Harry said. And we get a rift, potentially, at the broadcast point, at Stonehenge, which would be significantly worse than Stoatshead Hill, Harry said. Significantly, she pushed her hair back. It was doing the thing it did in the morning, the vast and autonomous thing. How are you actually not the case? You, he looked at the mirror, having a complicated week. I heard Luna's staying at Grimmauld Place. Who told you that? Luna's letter mentioned it. A pause that was carefully timed. How's Ginny, Hermione? I'm just asking. I know what you're doing. I'm asking after someone I care about, she said with the dignity of someone who is absolutely doing more than that and has decided dignity is the correct cover for it. Both of them, actually. Because I care about all three of you and I'm in a very uncomfortable position where I know what I observe and I have opinions about it, but it's not my place to. Hermione. Yes, thank you for the calculations, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Ron says hi, she said. He also says if you hurt either of them heal, and I'm quoting directly, find a very long word for the specific kind of idiot you'd have to be and deploy it accurately. That's the most Ron thing he's ever said. He's been workshopping it, she almost smiled. He does actually care underneath the vocabulary threat, so do I, she paused. We trust you, Harry, even when you're figuring things out in real time. We always have. He looked at her in the mirror, this woman who had been next to him through everything, through every iteration of impossible, who had always trusted his judgment even when it was wrong and helped him correct it even when she was terrified. He felt something warm and very old. Thank you, he said. Don't get sentimental, she said crisply. Go talk to Luna about the coefficient revision. She'll want to update her calculations and I need her confirmation before I finalize the theoretical framework. She reached for the mirror's edge. And Harry, yeah. Whatever it is you're figuring out about yourself, figure it out properly, don't leave it half done. She closed the connection. He sat with the mirror for a moment. Then he got up and went to find Luna. She was in the library, Grimmauld Place's library, which was exactly as dark and overfurnished as the rest of the Black family's aesthetic choices, but which had excellent morning light from the east-facing window, and which Luna had apparently identified as the best working space in the house and claimed without announcement. She'd moved one of the tables to the window. She was there now, surrounded by Hermione's revised parchments and her own diagrams, doing precise things with a small geometric instrument Harry didn't recognize and a set of calculations that were clearly several drafts into their current form. She looked up when he came in. Hermione called, she said. How did you know? You have the expression you get when someone has told you something important and also said something personal. It's a very specific combination. She set the geometric instrument down. What did the coefficient revision say? He sat in the armchair across from her. The room only had one window chair and one armchair and he'd left the window chair to her without thinking about it, which she'd apparently also not thought about, which meant it had simply become their configuration in this room. 72 hours for full distribution, better than your estimate. I was conservative, she said, making a note. The lay network is more robust than the academic literature suggests. Most of the literature is pre-war and the lay network responded to the magical intensity of the Battle of Hogwarts in ways that, she stopped herself, looked up. Sorry, the important thing is it's better. The initiation load is significant, Harry said. 4 minutes of sustained connection. She went still just for a moment, then she nodded and wrote something. I know I've been modeling it. Your resonance tolerance should be sufficient based on the Stoatshead reading. She paused. Should be. You're not cert. I'm not cert, she said. Number I want to run a controlled test before we attempt Stonehenge, something smaller. A single ley line node, there's one in Wiltshire, 20 kilometers from the main convergence. If you can sustain a broadcast connection at that node for 30 seconds, the proportional calculation suggests you can sustain Stonehenge for 4 minutes. He looked at her. You've already planned this. I've been planning it since Tuesday, she said. I didn't say anything because she stopped. Because you thought I'd object, he said. Because I thought you might want to object and I wanted the plan to be finished enough that your objections would be addressed before you made them. She met his eyes with a directness that was completely unapologetic. I knew you'd say yes to the test. I wanted to make sure the test was worth saying yes to. He should probably have had something to say about that. He found he didn't specifically. Tomorrow, if Priya's readings arrive today, they should, he'd messaged Priya at 7. She does everything early. Luna made another note. He watched her write, the specific efficiency of her left hand, the way she held the pen at a slightly unconventional angle that produced unusually clean lines, the occasional pause where she was doing something in her head before committing it to paper. Luna, he said. Last night, after you left, Ginny and I talked. The pen slowed, then stopped. She looked up without moving the pen from the page. How is she? Luna said. It was the first question. Not what did you say or what happened. How is she? She's... Harry held the word for a moment. She's Ginny. She was honest and clear, and she said what she needed to say without making it into something it wasn't. He looked at the window. She's a better person than most people know because she does it without making sure you notice how good she's being. I know, Luna said. She was kind to me at school when most people weren't. She never made a production of it. She just included me. She looked at her page. I've always admired her. The room was quiet. The morning light came through the window in clear, slanted columns falling across the table and the papers and the careful geometric diagram. She saw it, Harry said. What's happening? She saw it before I'd admitted it to myself. Luna was very still. I don't know what to do with that, he said. Completely, I know some of it and I don't know other parts of it yet, and he stopped, started again. But I'm not pretending, Luna, that I don't know what I feel. I'm done with that version of this. She looked up, the clear, full look. What do you feel? She said. Just that, no performance around it, just the actual question. He thought about the silver rod, the light that came for no one else. The recognition that was nothing like being chosen by fate and everything like being known by a person. Like I've been half present for 2 years, he said. Like I've been standing in a room and holding it together from habit and calling that living. He met her eyes. And like the week you've been back has been the first week in 2 years where the room was actually lit. Luna held his gaze. Something moved across her face, not the controlled, careful thing she usually did with things that mattered. Something that moved freely because it was too large to manage. I've been in love with you since the Hogwarts Express, she said. Since you sat down in the compartment and didn't ask me to be less strange. She said it with the same quality she said everything, precise and complete, without edge or agenda, just the fact of it. I've never said it because it was never the right time, and I've never been someone who needed to say things just because they're true, but it's been true for a very long time. He looked at her. The full attention, the one he'd been giving the case, given instead to this. The timing is, he started. I know, she said. You and Ginny aren't, not resolved, he said. Not yet, I know. She held his gaze without wavering and without asking him for anything. I'm not asking you for anything, Harry. I told you because you said you were done pretending, and I thought the honest response to that was to stop pretending in the same direction. She paused. I can wait. I've waited 6 years. I'm remarkably patient about most things. He almost laughed. Something in his chest was doing a complicated thing, not clean or simple but real. The way real things were never clean or simple, carrying the weight of Ginny and the weight of 2 years of hollowness and the weight of 6 years of a feeling he'd only half let himself see. You sat down in the compartment, Luna continued, quieter now, and you asked me what I was reading. Not as an opener, because you actually wanted to know. Nobody asked me that, not as the first thing. She looked at her journal. I wrote it down that night. I write down things that matter. That was in the first page. He had not known that. The not knowing of it was considerable. I asked because you were reading it upside down, he said. I know, it's the best way to read something the second time. You notice different things. He sat in the armchair in the morning light and looked at her across the table and thought about all the times she'd been in a room with him and he'd known the particular quality of what she brought to a room, the specific gravity of it, the way everything was clearer, and had categorized it as Luna rather than this, and whether that had been self-protection or genuine ignorance, and whether the distinction mattered now. Give me time, he said. As much as you need, she said. She picked up the geometric instrument. Now let me show you the Wiltshire node calculation, because Priya will have readings by noon and I want to be in Wiltshire by tomorrow morning. He pulled his chair closer and looked at the diagram she'd spread between them. Outside, London continued its business. The light shifted as clouds moved across it, dimming, then returning, then dimming again in the variable way of June mornings that hadn't decided what kind of day they were going to be. At one point, Harry reached across the table to move a parchment he needed to see more clearly, and his hand brushed hers, not accidentally, not arranged, just the incidental contact of two people working close together, and neither of them moved apart, and neither of them commented on it, and the diagram between them held all the mathematics of something enormous about to be attempted. He looked at the numbers. He followed her calculation through from premise to conclusion and found it correct, as her calculations generally were, which was one of the things about her that was impossible to overstate, the rigor of her underneath the dreaming. "This works," he said. "Yes," she said. "I believe it does." He thought about vessel and voice again, about the difference between holding something inside you until it crystallized and letting it move through you and outward into the world where it could find the shape of the space it was meant for. He thought about the hollow year, about the rooms he'd been in and the rooms he was in now and the quality of light in each. Priya's message arrived at 11:58. The Inverness readings confirmed the ninth site. Voss had been there. A tripod arrangement, identical to Stoats Head Hill, 9 instruments. Day 1 carved into the limestone near a Category 1 heritage site overlooking the Moray Firth. Day 1 of the final sequence, 11 days remaining. "Wiltshire tomorrow," Harry said. "Wiltshire tomorrow," Luna confirmed. He took the Priya parchment and began feeding the new values into Luna's diagram, and she worked beside him, and the library filled with the small sounds of people doing careful, important things. The scratch of pens, the occasional question, the silence between questions that was not empty. At some point in the early afternoon, while Harry was recalculating a resonance distribution curve, and Luna was making tea for the 3rd time at the small electric kettle she'd installed in the library because going to the kitchen wasted time, she set a mug at his elbow without interrupting him, and he said thank you without looking up, and she said of course and went back to her side of the table. It was the smallest thing. It was nothing. It was the kind of nothing that, if you paid proper attention to it, contained quite a lot. Harry paid proper attention to it quietly while continuing to calculate. Outside, the June afternoon lengthened. London went about its business. Somewhere across the city, in a flat she'd kept for the season, Ginny Weasley sat with a cup of tea and thought her clear, honest, Weasley thoughts about the nature of love and loss and letting go. And she was, as Harry had said and meant, better than most people knew because she didn't make a performance of the thinking. She sat with it and she let it be what it was. And at Grimmauld Place, in a library with morning light that had now become afternoon light, 2 people worked toward something necessary and something true, side by side, making no performances at all. Chapter 5. Voss and the Architecture of Everything. The Wiltshire Test worked. Harry stood at the ley line node, a flat, unremarkable piece of field 20 kilometers outside Amesbury, marked on Luna's map with a small circle and on the ground by absolutely nothing, just grass and the faint electrical quality of the air that you'd mistake for weather if you didn't know what you were feeling for, and reached down into the low register, the place where his magic lived when it wasn't performing, and opened it toward the earth. 30 seconds. Luna had said 30 seconds. He lasted 47 before she touched his arm and told him to stop. The field around them had shifted. Priya, standing 20 meters back with her instruments, confirmed it. A clean, even distribution of resonance across the local ley segment, propagating outward in both directions from the node at exactly the rate Luna's mathematics had predicted. No rebound, no fracture, no damage to Harry, who felt, when it was done, approximately the way he felt after a hard Auror training session, tired in the muscles, clear in the head. Luna wrote the results in her journal without looking particularly surprised. 47 seconds, Priya said, still watching her instruments. At that ratio, the Stonehenge broadcast would sustain for 6 minutes and 12 seconds, Luna said. We only need 4. Priya looked at Harry. You're all right? Fine, he said. And meant it. Luna looked at him with the silver rod in her hand. She'd taken a reading during the broadcast, holding it at the edge of the node while the connection was open. The sphere had been, by her later account, the brightest she'd ever seen it. She wrote that down too in smaller letters below the main results. They were back in London by noon. Voss made contact that afternoon. Not through official channels, not through the ministry, not through Robards, not through any of the traceable networks that Seamus had been patiently mapping for 6 days. He made contact through the Quibbler. Specifically, through a letter addressed to the editor, to Luna, delivered by an owl Harry didn't recognize. A large, grey Scandinavian bird that arrived at Grimmauld Place at 2:30 and waited with the composed patience of a very professional animal for Luna to read the letter and write a response. She brought it to Harry without preamble, set it on the table between them. The handwriting was spare and methodical, each letter formed with the precision of someone for whom clarity was not a courtesy but a discipline. Miss Lovegood, I have read your research notes, forwarded to me by a mutual contact in Reykjavik. Your redistribution model is incorrect in one significant respect, which I would discuss with you in person if you are willing. I would also speak with Mr. Potter. I believe we are working toward the same end by different means, and I think this is a conversation worth having before either of us acts further. I propose a meeting on neutral ground. I will come alone. I ask that you come with no more than 2 others. Harry read it twice. Who's the contact in Reykjavik? He said. The scholar I mentioned, the one I spoke with about cumulative resonance theory. Luna was watching him read. I trusted him, I still do. He wouldn't have forwarded my notes maliciously. But he forwarded them to Voss. He probably thought he was helping. She said it without irritation. He knows us both in a research context. He'd see us as colleagues working the same problem. Harry set the letter down. The incorrect respect in your model. I've been thinking about that since I read it. She was quiet for a moment. There's one assumption in the distribution calculation I haven't been able to fully verify, the propagation rate through the ley network's northern segments. The historical records are inconsistent. I've been using the most conservative available figure. She met his eyes. He might have better data. Or he might be luring us somewhere he's already prepared. Yes, she said, that's possible. He looked at her. Do you think he'd do that? She considered it properly. Number the letter's tone is collegial. Someone who wanted to trap us wouldn't bother with the intellectual courtesy of identifying a specific flaw. She paused. But I could be wrong. You're not wrong about people often. I'm wrong about people I want to be right about, she said. I'm aware of that bias. He picked up the letter again. Read the last line. A conversation worth having before either of us acts further. The phrasing of someone who considered both parties to be acting, who didn't position himself as the agent and Harry as the obstacle, but as 2 people approaching the same destination from different directions. He thought about page 43 of the Voss file. The nucleus must consent. Consent must be genuine. He's going to try to persuade me, Harry said. Yes, and you want to hear what he has to say. I want to give him the opportunity to be persuaded by us, she said. Which is different. I think he's reachable. I think his goal is sound and his method is the problem, and I think if we can show him our method is better, mathematically, not argumentatively, he'll listen. He's been working alone for 18 months. People who work alone for 18 months on a single problem are either completely entrenched or desperate to talk to someone who actually understands the work. She met his eyes. Which type do you think he is based on his file? Harry had read the file 3 times. He knew it now, the shape of the mind behind it, the specific quality of its intelligence. The rigor that was also loneliness when you looked at it the right way. The certainty that had the texture of a man who hadn't had anyone to argue with in a very long time. Desperate to talk, he said. Yes, Luna said, that's what I thought. He wrote a response. Brief, direct. Tomorrow night, you choose the location, we'll come. The Scandinavian owl took it and left, apparently satisfied. Voss chose the Department of Mysteries, which was either boldly pragmatic or deeply concerning, and Harry held both possibilities simultaneously during the 24 hours between accepting the meeting and arriving at it. Robards had 3 separate objections when Harry briefed him: the location, the small team, the civilian involvement. Harry addressed all 3 with the patience of someone who had already decided and was doing Robards the courtesy of explaining rather than the necessity of asking. He chose the department, Harry said. Which means either he has access, which tells us something important about how far inside this goes, or he's calling a bluff. Either way, we need to be there. And Lovegood, Robards said. She's the best theoretical mind on this problem we have, Harry said. Better than anyone in this building, she comes. Robards looked at him. Robards had looked at him like this before, the specific look of a man who knew he was going to lose the argument, and was deciding whether to lose it quickly or slowly. Priya Chakraborty goes with you. Already planned on it, Harry said. They went in at 10 at night, Harry, Luna, Priya. The ministry was quiet at that hour, the skeleton staff of overnight maintenance and security barely noting their passage. The elevator to the Department of Mysteries, the black circular room, the doors rotating. Harry didn't touch his wand. He walked forward and the correct door opened. The death chamber. He hadn't been back since he was 15. He'd known that tonight he would have to be, and he'd thought he'd prepared for it, and he found, standing at the threshold, that preparation and readiness were not the same thing, and he'd been confusing them. The room was as he remembered, tiered stone steps descending to a sunken floor, and at the center of that floor the archway. Ancient, freestanding, worn at its edges. And through it the veil, a tattered black curtain hanging without wind in a room where there was no wind and yet moving, always moving, the slow, deliberate movement of something that was not responding to air. He heard them, the voices. He'd always heard them, always, every time he was near enough, the soft, murmuring sound behind the veil that he'd spent years trying to decide was real and had eventually accepted was real in the way that mattered, which was that it was real to him. Luna heard them too. He could tell by the quality of her stillness when she entered the room behind him, a stillness different from her usual kind, which was the stillness of attention. This was the stillness of a person being very careful. Priya heard nothing and said so quietly to Harry. Standard response: the sensitivity to veil voices was not universal, was connected to proximity with death and loss and magic of a very old kind. Harry had expected it. Voss was already there. He was standing at the base of the steps between them and the archway, not threateningly. He'd positioned himself, Harry noted, so that they were between him and the exit rather than the other way around. A deliberate choice. A man making himself vulnerable to establish trust. He was older than his file photo suggested. The file was 4 years old, and the past 4 years had clearly operated on Aldrich Voss with some intensity. He was perhaps 55, lean, with close-cropped gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent time outdoors conducting field research in northern latitudes. He wore no robes, just dark, practical clothing, the kind you could move in. His wand was holstered at his hip. He made no movement toward it when they entered. He looked at Harry first. Then Luna. "Miss Lovegood," he said, "your redistribution model is extraordinary. I mean that without qualification." "Thank you," Luna said. "You mentioned a flaw." "Yes," he looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter, I appreciate you coming." "You said you'd come alone," Harry said. "I did. The door opened for us, specific door, specific room." Harry kept his voice easy, conversational. That required either an Unspeakable's access or a modification to the chamber's directional enchantments. Voss didn't look particularly unsettled by this. "I worked in this department for 11 years, he said. "I know where things are. I left nothing in this room except a direction adjustment on the circular room's rotation, which will deactivate when I leave." He paused. "You can verify that now if you'd like." Harry glanced at Priya. She was already scanning with her own instruments, had been since they entered. She gave him a small nod, one modification, just the one he described. "All right," Harry said. He walked down the steps to the floor level, not quickly, not cautiously, just directly. Luna came with him. Priya stayed at the top of the steps, instruments running, scanning continuously. The veil moved behind Voss. Harry didn't look at it directly. "The flaw in her model," Harry said. Voss looked at Luna. "The northern ley segment propagation rate. You've used the Bradbury figure 1987, the most recent systematic survey. But the Bradbury survey was conducted using second-generation instruments that couldn't accurately read the upper resonance frequencies. The actual propagation rate in the northern segments is approximately 30% faster." He reached into his coat and produced a folder, set it on the stone step between them. "My own measurements, taken on-site in 6 locations across the past 14 months. Luna picked it up. She opened it and read with the speed of someone who has spent years consuming technical literature. Harry watched her face, the focused precision, the slight tightening at her brow when she found something that demanded attention. She turned 3 pages, stopped. "Read something twice. This is good data," she said. It came out with the particular tone of someone who'd been hoping to find fault and hadn't. "It changes the timeline," Voss said. "Your model gives 72 hours for full distribution. The corrected figure is closer to 50 hours. "Which is better," Luna said. "Yes," he met her eyes. "Your method works, Miss Lovegood. I want you to understand that. I ran your calculation last night with the corrected propagation rate. It works." A pause. "It's also significantly safer than mine." Harry looked at him. "Then why are you still running 9 resonance sites?" "Because I began them before I saw your model." Voss's voice was even, the voice of a man who'd had difficult conversations before and had learned to hold his own position without aggression. "And because I wasn't certain until last night that yours was viable." He looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter, I have been working toward a solution to a catastrophic problem for 18 months. I don't ask you to approve of my methods. I do ask you to understand what I was trying to prevent." "The critical density event," Harry said. 14 to 18 months, cascading fractures." Voss's expression shifted, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "Oduya told you?" "Yes." "Then you know I'm not." He stopped, started again. "I'm not a villain in this, Mr. Potter. I'm an extremely alarmed person who found a problem the ministry classified, and I solved it the only way I thought I could." He looked at his hands, the hands of someone who had spent years holding instruments, measuring things, writing down what he found. "I know what my method required of you. I know you understand that." "Page 43, Harry said. Voss looked at him. "Your file, your own notation." Harry held his gaze. "The nucleus must consent. You were always going to ask me." Voss was quiet for a long moment. The veil moved behind him, that slow, sourceless movement. Yes, he said. I was going to show you the data, the trajectory, the inevitability of it, and ask you whether you were willing. He paused. I was not going to trap you or coerce you. The resonance wouldn't respond to it. I know, Harry said. So your plan was to present the choice and trust that you do what you've always done, Voss said. Yes, Harry looked at him. At the tired, certain face of a man who'd been right about the problem and wrong about the solution and had the particular kind of dignity left to him of acknowledging it clearly. I'm not doing what I've always done, Harry said. Not this time. Not because I'm unwilling to take risks, because there's a better option and I'm going to use it. Voss looked at Luna. The propagation rate correction, she said. It works 50 hours, clean distribution, no nucleus, no use of the veil. She closed the folder and held it out. Help us instead. Voss looked at the folder, at Luna, at Harry, then he looked at the veil. It was a long look. The kind of look that has a great deal of history in it. Harry recognized it because he'd aimed that look at enough places to know what it meant. The look of a man reckoning with something personal and private in a room full of other people and making no pretense that he wasn't. My daughter, Voss said quietly. She died 7 years ago, dragon pox. She was 19. He looked at the veil. I've stood in this room more times than I can count. I've never been able to stop hearing. He stopped himself. His jaw moved. You understand that? Yes, Harry said. My crystallization model, Voss said. The unified resonance object. I still believe theoretically that a stable crystallized hollow resonance could act as a kind of anchor between states. Between this side and whatever is on the other side. He looked at Harry. I don't only want to close the rifts, you want to stabilize the veil, Luna said quietly. Voss said nothing for a moment. I want to make the threshold more permeable in a controlled way. I want to be able to. He stopped, looked at his hands again. She died very quickly. There was no time to say. He stopped. The death chamber was very quiet. Even the veil seemed to still. Harry looked at this man, this meticulous, brilliant, deeply grieving man who had spent 18 months building an elaborate magical apparatus aimed at a problem that was real and dangerous, and was also, underneath all the rigorous mathematics, a father who wanted to say something to his daughter. He thought about the resurrection stone, about the cool weight of it in his palm in the dark before the forest, about his mother and father and Sirius and Lupin, pale and translucent in the night air, not quite there. He thought about what he'd said to Luna on the moor. Coming out felt different because you chose it. Voss, he said. The man looked up. The redistribution method closes the rifts and stabilizes the ambient resonance field. It doesn't affect the veil. Harry kept his voice level, direct. But if the resonance field is stable, not accumulating, not fracturing, the Department of Mysteries could pursue dedicated veil research from a position of stability. Properly, with resources. He paused. Which is not the same as what you wanted, but it's more than you currently have. Voss held his gaze for a long time. The calculation behind those eyes was visible not because Voss was careless but because it was too large to fully conceal. You'd advocate for that, Voss said, the research, if you help us with the redistribution. Yes. Luna was watching both of them. She didn't intervene. She understood. Harry thought that this was not a moment for intervention, that the conversation had arrived at a place where two people needed to find it together or not at all. The 9 sites, Voss said slowly. If I stop the accumulation cycle now, the resonance decays naturally over 3 to 4 weeks, Luna said. The rifts at the existing sites will close on their own once the feed is interrupted. We only need to worry about Stonehenge. A pause. We go in 2 days. When you stop feeding the sites, the timing aligns. Voss looked at the folder in her hand, at his own data which she was holding, at the propagation figures that corrected her calculation and made it better, his data making her solution work. The collaboration that had arrived in spite of everything. What do you need from me? He said. Harry had been ready for the answer to this. He'd been ready since reading the file, since understanding the shape of the man behind it. The 9th site, he said. Inverness, you haven't fully activated it yet. Day 1. You need to make sure it stays at day 1, no further accumulation. He paused. And I need your measurements from all 8 active sites. Exact current resonance levels. Luna's calculation for the broadcast needs accurate input values to calibrate the initiation correctly. Voss reached into his coat again. Another folder, thicker, heavier. He set it on the step. Luna picked it up immediately. She opened it and the expression on her face was the one Harry associated with very good data and very good arguments, the specific quality of attention that was also satisfaction. These are extraordinary, she said. The measurement precision, 14 months of iteration, Voss said, not with pride, with the tiredness of it. I know, she said, I can see it. She looked at him. I'm sorry it took so long to find each other in this. Voss looked at her. The tiredness shifted, not gone, but rearranged around something else. Something that was perhaps relief or the anticipation of it. So am I, he said. Priya came down the steps. She'd been listening and scanning simultaneously, and the scan confirmed what Harry had read in the room. No trap, no second layer, no concealed magic. Just a man and a conversation. The active sites, Priya said to Voss. You have people at some of them. 2 people, research assistants, entirely civilian. They don't know the full scope of what I've been doing. They believe they're collecting resonance data for academic publication. His expression held the discomfort of that. I'll contact them tonight. Pull them out? We'll need them to submit to a brief interview, Priya said. Standard protocol. I'll arrange it. Priya looked at Harry. Harry nodded once. The logistics continued, times, coordinates, the specific technical details of deactivating the accumulation cycle at 8 sites simultaneously without triggering a rebound. Voss walked them through it with the precision of someone who had thought about the reversal procedure as carefully as he'd thought about everything else. He'd always known he might need to stop. He'd built in the exit. Harry watched and listened and let Priya manage the procedural elements because Priya was better at procedural elements and he was better at watching people and understanding what they actually needed. What Voss needed, Harry thought, was exactly what he'd said. Not permission to be heard, he'd never needed permission for that. What he needed was someone to acknowledge that the problem was real and that the grief underneath it was real and that neither of those things made him wrong for wanting to solve both. When the logistics were done and Voss was preparing to leave, Harry stopped him with a hand on his arm, not gripping, just a moment's pause. The Veil research, Harry said. I'll put it in writing. A formal recommendation to Oduya. Dedicated study into the nature of the threshold and the possibility of stable, controlled resonance interaction. He met Voss's eyes. I can't promise what they'll find or if... I know, Voss said. I know that, he held Harry's gaze. Thank you, he left. The circular room rotated after him, then settled. The modification to the directional enchantments dissolved. Priya confirmed it with one final scan. The 3 of them stood in the death chamber. The veil moved. Harry looked at it directly. Something he rarely let himself do, allowed the full attention of it rather than the peripheral awareness he usually maintained as self-protection. The movement of the cloth, the darkness behind it. The voices, soft and murmuring, speaking in a register just below comprehension. He thought about Sirius, about falling through and not coming back, about the green light over and over in his dreams, about every person who had gone through a door like this one and hadn't come back to him. He thought about choosing to go through himself in the forest and how that had felt, not like an ending but like a threshold, exactly like this, a place you crossed with full knowledge and came back changed. He felt Luna come to stand beside him, not touching, just present in the specific way she had of being present, which was total and undemanding at once. Can you hear them? He said. Yes, she said. Faintly, fainter than before. A pause. I think, she stopped. What? I think they're all right, she said. Whatever all right means there. She looked at the veil. I've thought about this for 11 years, every configuration of what it could mean, and the closest I've gotten is they're all right. There's somewhere that has its own kind of all right in it. He looked at the veil, at the movement that was not wind. Yeah, he said, I think so too. Priya was already on the steps, tactfully examining her instruments and giving them a moment that she understood they needed without being told. Priya was, Harry thought, extraordinary in a number of ways that were easy to underestimate until you were in a situation like this one. We should go, Luna said. Yeah. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then Harry turned and they went back up the steps and the death chamber fell away behind them into the dark. 2 days, they worked through both of them without stopping for much. Grimmauld Place became the operational center. Papers, instruments, calculations, Hermione via mirror every few hours with updates and revisions. Seamus running coordination with Voss's assistants as they pulled back from the sites. Priya managing the ministry interface and keeping Robards informed in the specific, efficient way that gave him what he needed to not interfere without giving him enough to want to direct things. Voss sent updated readings from all 8 sites. They were exactly as precise as Luna had described, and they adjusted her calculations in ways that improved the model at every point. Harry watched her work with the new data, watched the way she held Voss's measurements up against her own, reading the space between them, finding the shape of the solution in the intersection. He helped. He'd stopped pretending he was just present for the physical component, the broadcast itself, when they both knew he was genuinely useful in the theoretical work as well. He asked good questions, he caught things. He had an instinct for the resonance that didn't come from calculation, that came from the same low register where the word at Stoatshead Hill had come from, and occasionally that instinct pointed at something the mathematics hadn't gotten to yet. Luna didn't make a production of this. She just said yes, that's right when it was and not quite, look here when it wasn't, and they proceeded. The night before Stonehenge, Seamus went home, Priya went to finalize ministry logistics, and the house went quiet. Harry made food, properly this time, not toast, an actual meal, and they ate it at the kitchen table with the diagrams pushed to one side and talked about things that weren't the case for the first time in 2 days. Luna told him about Mongolia. About a valley in the Gobi where the magical resonance was so thick you could taste it in the air, metallic like before lightning, and where she'd spent 3 weeks cataloging creatures that no established magizoologist had documented. She described them with a precision that was also love, the way she described everything she genuinely cared about. Harry told her about the year after the war. The version he didn't tell people, not the I was processing grief version or the learning to be normal version, but the actual texture of it. The feeling of walking into rooms and not knowing who he was in them anymore. The strange experience of waking up every morning and not having a task, not having the task, the one that had organized every moment of his life since he was 11 years old. The way that freedom had felt at first like falling. Luna listened the way she always listened, completely, without interjecting, without redirecting toward herself, with the full weight of her attention. You needed a purpose that was yours, she said when he'd finished. Not assigned. Not inherited, something you chose. Yes, he said, but I didn't know what that was. Do you know now? He looked at her. Getting there, he said. She held his gaze. The kitchen was warm. Outside, London at 11 at night was quieter than London at any other hour, not silent, never silent, but the ambient noise dropping to a register that felt almost like peace. I'm nervous about tomorrow, he said. About the broadcast, about all of it, she nodded. The broadcast is manageable. We've done the math, you've done the test. A pause. What else? He picked up his fork, set it down. What happens after, he said. The case ends, the rift's close. Everyone goes back to their departments. He met her eyes. What do we do with? He indicated the space between them, the particular atmospheric quality it had acquired over 10 days. Luna looked at her hands, then at him. I don't know precisely, she said, but I know I'd like to find out. A pause. And I think you would too. Yeah, he said, I think I would too. She looked at him with those clear, direct eyes that didn't accumulate things, that took each moment as the thing it actually was. Then we finish tomorrow, and then we find out. He nodded, simple as that when she said it. The mess and complication of the past 2 weeks, Ginny, the hollow year, the investigation, the grief, and the growing thing that was its opposite, all of it still present and real and unresolved, and also, then we find out, the future tense of something he'd been standing at the edge of. Get some sleep, she said. The resonance load at Stonehenge is going to be significant and you need to be fully rested. I know, I'll wake you at 5. You wake yourself at 5 regardless. Correct, I'll wake you at 5. She stood, gathered her mug, and paused at the door. Harry, yeah. You're going to be fine tomorrow. Said with the same quality as everything she said, not performed reassurance, just the fact of what she believed, offered plainly. Not because you always are, because this is the right thing and you know it, and that matters. With hollow resonance, it responds to intent. She paused. Your intent has always been good, even when everything else was difficult. He held that. Night, Luna, he said. Good night, she said, and left. Stonehenge at dawn was something else entirely. The plane was empty. Priya had arranged muggle-repelling charms across a half-kilometer radius the night before, ministry approved for the operation, logged and time-limited. The sky was the particular dark blue of 5:45 in the morning, the stars still visible in the west where the light hadn't reached yet, the east beginning to light with the slow, enormous patience of the sun not yet committed to showing itself. The stones stood in the pre-dawn dark like people who had been waiting long enough that waiting had become their nature. Harry had been here once before. A school trip, age 10, primary school, a coach and a packed lunch and a teacher who kept counting heads. He'd stood inside the barrier tape with 30 other children and looked at the stones and felt the same thing he felt now, though he hadn't had words for it then, the sense of something very old that was also very awake, not intelligent, older than intelligence, present in the way of things that had been present longer than anything else in the landscape. The ley convergence was physically perceptible here at the center of the circle. Not like the Wiltshire node that had been a local warmth, a subtle electrical quality. This was structural. This was like standing in the foundation of something that went all the way down. Luna had her instruments in a full array, 6 of them in a precise geometric spread around the central point, calibrated with the corrected propagation figures from Voss's data. Priya stood at the eastern edge of the circle, her own monitoring array running. Voss himself was not present by agreement, by choice, because his presence complicated things and he understood that. Seamus was 30 meters out, ward walking the perimeter. Unnecessary, probably. Harry didn't care. You brought the people you trusted. Harry stood at the center of the circle. He'd been here for 4 minutes, just standing, feeling the ley convergence under his feet, letting himself become familiar with the scale of it. You couldn't go directly into something this size cold, you had to meet it gradually, the way you entered very cold water. Let your body understand what it was approaching. Luna appeared at his side. She'd been calibrating the Eastern instruments. She looked at him. Ready, she said. Give me a moment. She gave him a moment. Exactly the right amount of one. Then Harry, yeah, I need you to understand what you're doing, she said. Not the mechanics, you know those. The actual what it is. She looked at the sky, the lightning east, the stones. You're not containing the resonance, you're not sacrificing anything, you're speaking it outward, like the word you said at Stoat's Head Hill, it came from the right place. This is the same place but louder. Louder, he said, significantly. She met his eye. Trust the resonance, it knows where to go, you're just the point of origin. The broadcaster, he said, yes. She reached into her coat and produced the silver rod. She held it out to him. The sphere was dark at her touch, always dark for her, she knew that. She held it out anyway, offering it as what it was, a measure, a calibration, a way to know when it was enough. When this is as bright as it will go, you're at full broadcast. 4 minutes from that point. He took the rod. It lit immediately, brighter than he'd ever seen it, brighter than Wiltshire, the cold silver blue filling the space between the standing stones and making the pre-dawn dark recede. Luna looked at it, looked at him, said nothing. He turned to face east. The sky was lightening faster now, the horizon going from dark blue to something more complicated, the particular gradient of pre-dawn that came in stages, each one a different kind of not quite morning. He reached down. Into the low register. Into the place where his magic lived when it wasn't performing, the place that was older than training, older than Hogwarts, older than the scar and the prophecy and everything that had been laid on him before he was old enough to consent to any of it. The ley lines were there, all of them. He could feel them converging under his feet, running outward in every direction like roots, like rivers, like the architecture of something that had been built before the first person ever learned to call it anything. He opened, not wide, not all at once. The way you opened a door into a gale, carefully, using your weight, feeling the pressure before you committed to it. The resonance arrived. All 8 sights flowing through the ley network toward the convergence point, toward him the way water flows toward low ground. Not aggressive, not painful, vast. The way the ocean is vast when you're in it rather than looking at it from shore. The difference between a fact and an experience. He felt every one of Voss's sights. Stoat's Head Hill, the moor, the sheep, the standing stones, the North Sea, the Orkneys, 7 others, each with their own character, their own accumulated texture. He felt the resonance of all 3 Hallows in the combined field. The wand, cool and old and cert, the stone heavy with grief and longing, the cloak soft as running water, familiar as his own skin. He felt the death chamber. Not physically, it wasn't connected to this network directly. But the veil's resonance was present in the field, faint and pervasive, the way a tuning fork's frequency is present in any resonant material nearby. He felt it and moved past it, not avoiding it, just clear about direction. Outward, not inward, broadcast. The silver rod in his hand was blazing. He heard Luna somewhere to his left, steady and present. 4 minutes, beginning now. 4 minutes. He opened fully. The resonance poured through him, through the ley convergence, through the broadcast point, outward along every ley channel in the British network. Not destructive, not containing. The opposite of containing, releasing the resonance that had been accumulating and tightening and fracturing, finding suddenly, all at once, the space it had needed and flowing outward into it with something he could only describe afterward as relief. Like a held breath released. Like a room after a door is opened. At the 30-second mark, the sphere was the brightest thing on the plane. At 90 seconds, Harry felt the northern segments accelerate, the corrected propagation rate, Voss's data, the figure Luna had updated in her model, faster than expected. The distribution was ahead of schedule. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, he felt the Stoat's Head Hill site go quiet. The rift sealed, clean, no fracture, no rebound. He couldn't know this, not in any conventional sense, but he knew it. The way he'd known the stone was in exactly the right place, sitting in the leaf mold of the forest. The way the resonance told him things when he was properly open to it that didn't translate into words but were absolutely certain. One by one, the rifts closing. The accumulated resonance finding distribution, thinning out, the interference patterns dissolving as the field evened out. At 3 minutes 30 he felt something he hadn't anticipated. The veil, not threatening, not a problem. Just present, the resonance in the veil's threshold responding to the broadcast, not being swept up in it, not being altered but settling. Like a room that's been vibrating and finds all at once the right acoustic equilibrium. The voices behind it, which he could always hear when he was in contact with Hallow resonance at any significant level, he heard them now, not words, but something that was the shape of words, in the particular way that things behind the veil were the shape of the things you remembered. He thought of Sirius, he thought of his parents, he thought of Lupin and Tonks and Fred Weasley and all of them, all the names he carried, the particular weight of each one. He let the thought go, not releasing the grief. He'd learned, finally, that grief was not something you released but something you made room for. He just let it pass through him the way the resonance was passing through him, outward into the world, where it became part of the background illumination of everything. The space between stars is the memory of light that has moved on. 4 minutes, Luna said. He closed. The ley lines settled under his feet, still there, still vast but quiet now. The way the ocean is quiet after a wave has broken, still the ocean, still itself, just returned to its natural state. The silver rod went dark gradually, the sphere cooling, the light receding by degrees. Harry opened his eyes. The sun had risen. He hadn't noticed it happening. At some point during the 4 minutes the sky had committed to morning and the plain was lit with early gold, the standing stones casting long shadows westward, the grass very green and very still. Luna was at his side. She'd been there, he understood, the entire time, not touching, not speaking, just present. Her instruments were still running. She looked at the readings, looked at him, looked at the readings again. All 9 sights, she said. Resonance at ambient, no fractures. She looked up. Harry, it worked. Yeah, he said. He was tired in the way he described to Hermione, the good kind, the kind that meant the work had been done. His legs were solid under him. His head was clear. The 4 minutes had been enormous and he'd held them, and now they were over and the world was sealed and the morning was gold and the standing stones cast their long shadows. He looked at Luna. Her face in the early light, the precise, glad face of someone whose calculation had been confirmed by the world. The propagation will complete in 50 hours, she said. Then we take a final reading to confirm full distribution. Right, he said, and Voss's sights will decay naturally. The existing rifts are closed, he said. I felt them close. She looked at him. You felt them, one by one, during the broadcast. She wrote it down immediately because she was Luna and important data was important data regardless of timing. He smiled, watching her write. She looked up and caught the smile and held it, the way you hold something that's been offered. How are you? She said. Not the case, him? Good, he said, and meant it fully, simply, without qualification. Really good. She reached out and took the silver rod back from him, tucking it into her coat. Her fingers brushed his palm as she took it and stayed there for a moment, not accidental, not staged, just a moment chosen deliberately, offered. He turned his hands slightly and held hers. They stood in the middle of Stonehenge in the early morning light, among stones that had been standing long enough to become indifferent to human drama, with the ley lines settled under their feet and the resonance field of Britain finally, 50 years ahead of catastrophe, returning to its natural equilibrium. Priya from the eastern edge of the circle said clearly and professionally, all readings confirmed, the broadcast was successful. A pause. I'll start writing up the report. Give us 5 minutes, Harry said. I'll give you 10, Priya said, and walked further east, instruments in hand, doing her job. Seamus's voice floated in from the perimeter. Can someone tell me what just happened? The ward walking is very boring and I saw the sky do something weird. The sky did something weird, Luna called back. In a good way. Classic, Seamus said and went back to ward walking. Harry looked at the east. At the risen sun, the long gold light of the morning, the plain and the sky and the stones. He thought about the 47 seconds at the Wiltshire node and the 4 minutes at the convergence and the word at Stoatshead Hill and the rift quieting under his hand and all the moments along the way that had been building to this one without asking him to notice them. He thought about being a broadcaster, a voice, the point of origin. He held Luna's hand in the morning light and thought about what it meant to let things move outward instead of holding them in. Then he turned and looked at her and she was already looking at him and the case was done and the world was sealed and everything that came next was unscripted. Good, he thought, he'd always been better at unscripted. Chapter 6, The Space Between Stars. The Ministry held a formal debrief on the Thursday following Stonehenge, which was exactly the kind of thing the Ministry did. Took something that had happened in a field at dawn, with cold hands and early light and the particular exhausted clarity of work that had cost something and been worth it, and put it in a room with overhead lighting and a long table and people in good robes who wanted to understand it in a way that produced paperwork. Harry sat through it. He answered questions. He was precise and complete and left nothing out, including Voss, including the unauthorized elements of the investigation, including Luna's role, which he described in full without softening or hedging because he was not interested, at this point in his life, in managing how institutions perceived the people who had saved them. Oduya was there. She listened to all of it with the particular attention of a woman who had been right about most things, and was cataloging the ways this confirmed it. When Harry finished his account, she said, Miss Lovegood's redistribution model will be formally adopted by the Department of Mysteries as the standard framework for Hallow resonance management. She said it the way she said everything, as a fact, not a favor. Robard said something about protocol. Harry let him say it, agreed with the parts worth agreeing with, and moved on. The debrief ended at noon. Harry signed 4 things, declined to sign 2 others on the grounds that they misrepresented the timeline, and walked out of the ministry into July sunlight that was genuinely warm for the first time that season. Luna was waiting on the pavement. She had her journal and her coat, and the small tin of tea she carried everywhere, and an expression of someone who had declined to attend the debrief on the grounds that institutional validation was not something she needed for her sense of self-worth, which was the correct position. How was it? She said. They're adopting your framework as standard, he said. She looked at him. Officially, Oduya's words. Something moved across her face, quiet, pleased, the way she received good things. Not performed modesty or performed excitement, just the genuine response given directly. Good, she said. It's the right framework. It is, he said. Lunch. I know somewhere, she said. She took him to a small cafe in Bloomsbury that didn't have a sign he could read from the street and had 8 tables and a blackboard menu that changed daily, and a proprietor who greeted Luna with the ease of someone who knew her order already. They sat at the window table. Outside, Bloomsbury did its particular Bloomsbury things: bookshops, students, people on bicycles making ambitious decisions about traffic. They ate and talked and didn't talk about the case, which was finished, and didn't talk about what came next, which was unscripted, and instead talked about everything else. Luna's creature documentation from Mongolia. She had detailed notes and planned to write a monograph, and had already been in correspondence with 3 magizoological journals who were interested, which had surprised her slightly because journals were not typically interested in things she submitted. Harry asked about the Hebrides sea caves she'd mentioned weeks ago, the thing she'd been going to tell him about later, and she told him, an extraordinary account of creatures she'd found in a tidal cave system off the Isle of Lewis, luminescent, barely corporeal, that registered on her instruments as having a magical signature unlike anything in the established taxonomy. She'd been back twice. She had measurements, sketches, theories. She talked about them with the same quality she brought to everything she genuinely loved, the complete engagement of a person who wasn't dividing their attention. Harry ate and listened and felt the particular pleasure of someone who has been in a room with urgent things for weeks, and has finally stepped into a room with no urgency, where everything present is present because it is genuinely interesting rather than immediately necessary. When are you going back? He said. To the Hebrides? I'd planned on August, she said. The tidal patterns are most consistent in late summer. Can I come? She looked at him across the table. To the sea caves, he said. I'd like to see them. The look she gave him was the direct kind, the kind that was reading the actual text. That's a yes, she said. Obviously, he smiled. She smiled. The window table in Bloomsbury on a July afternoon did not require anything more than this, and they both knew it. He went to see Ginny that weekend. She was at the burrow, not hiding, just at home, which she did when she needed the particular kind of grounding that only the burrow provided. Harry understood this. He'd spent enough evenings at that kitchen table to understand what the burrow did for people who had grown up in it. Molly was in the garden when he arrived, which was also, Harry suspected, deliberate on Ginny's part. The garden put Molly at sufficient distance from windows for a conversation to be private, which at the burrow was a logistical achievement. Ginny came to the door before he knocked. She'd heard the apparition. She looked at him and stepped back to let him in, and they sat at the kitchen table, and she made tea, and he didn't pretend that there was a casual version of this visit. I wanted to talk in person, he said. Not on the phone. You deserve in person. I know, she said. I've been waiting. She didn't say it with bitterness. How did Stonehenge go? I read the prophet's account. It was approximately 40% accurate. Pretty good for the prophet, he said. Luna's name was in there, Ginny said. 3rd paragraph, she got credit. Oduya insisted. Ginny wrapped both hands around her mug. Good, she meant it. He could hear that she meant it, and the fact that she meant it despite everything was so entirely Ginny that something caught in his throat. Gin, he said. I know, Harry. I need to tell you. I already know, she said, not unkindly. Not as a dismissal. I've known since the kitchen at Grimmauld Place. I told you I'm very bad at not seeing things. She looked at him. You don't have to explain. I don't need an explanation. You might want one. I want a lot of things, she said. An explanation isn't at the top. She paused. What I want is for you to be honest about it, with yourself first, with me, with her. She looked at the table. I've been watching us for months, Harry. Not obsessively, just watching. And I think we grew into each other and then we grew in different directions and we didn't notice until we were already too far apart to close the gap by wanting to. She said it quietly, without drama. That's not your fault, it's not mine. We were 17 when everything started. People are different at 17. We tried, he said. We did try. We really did. She looked at him. That matters to me, that you tried. He looked at her. This woman, the girl he'd fallen for at 15, the fighter he'd loved at 17, the person he'd tried to build a life with at 18 and 19 and 20. He loved her still, not the way he'd understood love at 15, not the way he'd needed her at 17. But genuinely, deeply, the way you loved people who had been through extraordinary things with you and come through it as themselves, intact and clear-eyed and better than the circumstances required. You're going to be fine, he said. More than fine. She half-laughed, the real one. I know I am, she said. I'm not worried about me, she stopped. I want you to be fine. That's the thing about loving someone properly, you don't stop wanting it for them because it's over. She met his eyes. Are you going to be fine? Yeah, he said. I think I actually am. She looked at him for a long moment, the reading look thorough and honest. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that was a closing and an opening simultaneously. Then we're all right, she said. Not right now, not entirely, but we're going to be. She reached out and squeezed his hand once, then let go. Don't tell her anything from me. She doesn't need a message from me, but I hope, she paused. I hope she knows what she has. She's Luna, Harry said. She knows everything. Ginny smiled, the genuine one unperformed. Yes, she said, she does. He stayed for another half hour. They talked about the Harpies, the season, Arthur's most recent Muggle obsession, which was apparently electric cars. They talked about Ron and Hermione and George, who was doing better, genuinely better in the specific way that took time and couldn't be forced and arrived on its own terms. They talked about the future in the way of people who have separated from each other's futures but still have investment in how each other's turns out. When he left, Molly was coming in from the garden, and she looked at Harry and looked at Ginny and said nothing, because Molly Weasley understood the shape of things in a kitchen full of her family with the precision of a woman who had been reading kitchens for 30 years. She hugged Harry. Long and firm, the Molly Weasley hug that said more than most people's speeches. Come for dinner, she said. Sunday. Molly, Sunday, she said, and went inside. He apparated from the lane and stood in London for a moment on a quiet street in July and felt not clean exactly, not resolved. Grief was not clean and endings were not resolved, but honest. The particular grace of things being what they actually were, rather than what you've been maintaining them as. He walked home in the afternoon light. The 50-hour mark arrived quietly, as things that complete themselves tend to do. Luna took final readings on Saturday morning, the ambient resonance field at 8 separate points across Britain, using her full instrument array starting at the Stoatshead Hill site and working south. Harry went with her. They drove, which was Luna's idea and Harry's complete surprise. She had a car, a small green thing of uncertain vintage that she drove with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided the car's suggestions were merely advisory. He sat in the passenger seat as they moved through the summer countryside, and she talked about ley line nodes and ley line acoustics, and a theory she developed about the relationship between standing water and magical resonance accumulation. And he listened and looked out the window at the rolling green of rural England and felt settled. The particular quality of settlement that came not from having fixed everything but from having stopped needing it fixed immediately. Stoatshead Hill in July was different from Stoatshead Hill in June. The heather was coming into color, the air warmer, the light longer and less dramatic. The moor sat in the afternoon sun and looked exactly like somewhere nothing unusual had ever happened, which was precisely what Moor was best at. Luna took her readings at the boundary of what had been the rift site. The grass had grown back over the slight depression in the ground where the instruments had stood. The air was entirely ordinary. The light did exactly what light did. She looked at her instruments for a long time, then she wrote something in her journal and closed it. Clean, she said. Completely ambient resonance at background level, no interference, no fracture risk, no anomalous accumulation. She looked at the moor. Done. He stood beside her and looked at the same stretch of moorland and thought about the 40-minute pulse, the compressed air, the light that had been wrong. The sheep mildly offended on the far side of the wall. Luna's shoulder against his in the cold morning crouched at the standing stone. Day 12, all of it already becoming the texture of something that had happened, not distant, not diminished, but finished in the way of things that have served their purpose and can now simply be. The curlew called. Somewhere out of sight as it had been the first day, the same curlew or another, liquid and unconcerned, falling over the hill. "Luna," he said. "Yes." He turned to her. She was looking at the moor still, journal under her arm, instruments in hand, her hair moving slightly in the wind that came from the west across the open ground. The coral piece was gone from her braid, had been for the past few days replaced by nothing, just the braid itself, which was simpler than the complicated version and suited her. She looked like herself. The most herself version of herself, which was a thing he'd been learning to see clearly, without the filter of expectation or category. "I'm not particularly good at this," he said. She turned to look at him. "At what?" He stopped, started again, "at saying the important thing directly. I'm better at action than declaration, which is useful in most contexts but not necessarily this one." She waited. Not impatiently, she had never done anything impatiently in her life as far as he could tell. "I'm in love with you," he said. The moor was very quiet. Luna looked at him with those clear eyes that read the actual text. She didn't look surprised. She'd said herself she'd known since the Hogwarts Express, which meant she'd been waiting 6 years for him to arrive at something she'd carried that entire time. He thought about what that required of a person to carry something that long, clearly and consciously without demanding anything of it, without pressing. "I know," she said. "I could see it." A pause, the small half-smile. "I see most things." "I know you do," he said. "It took me longer." "You were busy," she said, "dying and coming back and saving the world and so on." "That's a generous reading." "I'm a generous reader." She looked at him steadily, the smile settling into something quieter. "Harry, you don't have to make a speech about it. I know you know that's enough." He reached out, brushed the back of his hand against hers, the same kind of not accidental contact as Stonehenge, the deliberate kind, offered without staging. She turned her hand and he held it, the way he had in the morning light among the stones, and he thought about how natural that was, the specific ease of it, the way two things find their configuration without needing instruction. "What do you want?" he said. "From this, actually." She thought about it, not performing thought, actually considering with the thoroughness she gave everything. "I want to take you to the Hebrides Sea Caves," she said, "in August. And I want to show you the creatures and hear what you make of them. I want to have breakfast and not have to explain why I do things the way I do them. I want to argue about resonance theory at midnight and be right and have you admit it." She looked at him. "I want to be known, not the version people decide I am, the actual version." A pause. "I think you already know the actual version. You've known it since a train compartment 12 years ago." He'd just been calling it by the wrong name. "The Hebrides in August," he said. "Yes, and breakfast, the not explaining kind, and midnight arguments about resonance theory." "Which I will win," she said. "That's genuinely unclear." "It's very clear," she said. "I have better data." He laughed, the genuine one, unguarded, the kind that came without notice and meant the thing it was. She looked at the laugh with the expression she'd had in the kitchen when she wrote Harry's back in the margin, quiet and pleased, and not making a production of it. He leaned forward and kissed her, there on the moorland where the rift had been in the July afternoon, with the curlew calling somewhere out of sight and the heather coming into color and the world sealed and ordinary and exactly itself. She kissed him back, not surprised, just present, the full, unhurried presence she brought to everything she genuinely meant. When they stepped apart, the moor was still the moor and the light was still the light, and nothing had changed about the landscape and everything had changed about the day. "Right," he said. "Yes," she said. She tucked her instrument into her coat pocket and picked up her journal and started walking back toward the car. He fell into step beside her. "The propagation is complete," she said. "I'll write up the final report tonight. I'll help. I know you will. I'm going to want credit for the sections I actually wrote." "You'll get credit for the sections that are accurate," she said. "That's not what I said." "It's the appropriate standard," she said calmly. He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, walking, with the serene expression of someone who has set the terms of an arrangement and considers the arrangement settled. He thought about Hermione's handwriting getting faster when she was excited. He thought about Ron's vocabulary threat. He thought about Priya saying obviously when he asked if she could manage the site, and Seamus mouthing who is she in the Auror bullpen, and Oduya's precise eyes in the Department of Mysteries room. He thought about Voss, who was currently in formal cooperation with the Department of Mysteries on a dedicated Veil research initiative. Harry had put the recommendation in writing the day after Stonehenge, and Oduya had approved it the day after that, with the speed of someone who had been waiting for a justification to do it anyway. He thought about what it meant to be a man who had spent 18 months alone with a grief and a problem, and had finally, in the death chamber, been offered something better than the solution he'd built. He thought about the rift closing, one by one, while the resonance moved through him and outward into the ley network. The sequential quieting of something that had been strained and fractured. The felt sense of each fracture sealing, the way you feel the wind drop before you hear it. He thought about being a voice, a point of origin, not a vessel that contained things until they crystallized, but the place they moved through and outward from into the world, where they became part of the background illumination. Luna, he said, the monk in Tibet, what he said about the space between stars. The memory of light that has moved on, she said. The hallow resonance, it wasn't lost when the hallows were separated, it distributed, it became background, part of the field. Yes, she said. And the broadcast redistributed what had accumulated, sent it back into the field, so it's still there, not concentrated, not fracturing, just present, she said. Everywhere in small amounts, part of the ambient, part of the world. She glanced at him. The way love is, I think, when it distributes properly, it doesn't concentrate and fracture, it becomes present everywhere. He walked beside her and held that thought in the afternoon light. That's a very Luna thing to say, he said. I'm a very Luna person, she said. I know, he said. It's one of my favorite things about you. She looked at him with the direct look, the look that didn't accumulate things. Then she looked forward again at the path back to the car, and the slight upward curve of her mouth was there and stayed there, and he saw it and didn't comment on it because some things were better left in the form they naturally took. The Quibbler published Luna's account of the Stoats Head investigation 2 weeks later. It was scrupulously accurate, which surprised the 3 people who read it expecting otherwise and surprised no one who knew her. The redistribution theory was explained in terms accessible enough that the magical public could understand the significance without the mathematics, which was a harder thing to write than the mathematics themselves, and which she'd done effortlessly. The ministry's official statement credited the Auror office and the Department of Mysteries jointly, which was the institutional version of credit, correct in the broad strokes and somewhat blurred in the specifics. Priya's name was there. Harry's name was there. Luna's name was there in the supplementary notes, in the technical appendix, in the section on theoretical methodology, and in the dedication of Voss's revised research paper, which he published in the International Journal of Magical Theory under his own name, and which cited her model as foundational. She seemed more pleased by the Voss citation than any other recognition. Harry mentioned this to her and she said, he had better data than me and I had a better model than him, and together we solved the actual problem. That's worth citing. Then she said, also his methodology chapter is brilliant and I'm going to argue with half of it in the letters section. And she did, in a letter that was simultaneously the most polite and most thorough dismantling of a methodology section Harry had ever read. And Voss wrote back an equally long response in which he agreed with most of it, and challenged 2 points on grounds that were, Harry thought privately, not quite strong enough, and Luna destroyed those in the next letter. And Voss apparently found this delightful because he sent her his next draft to read before submission. She showed Harry the letter with an expression that was not quite smug but was in the vicinity of smug and had taken up residence there comfortably. He called my marginal notes invaluable, she said. They are invaluable, Harry said. You're also a bit smug about it. I'm appropriately pleased, she said. That's what smug people always say. She wrote something in the margin of Voss's draft, then she handed it to Harry and pointed at one of Voss's calculations. Look at this, she said. He's made an error in the field density assumption in paragraph 4. He looked, then he looked more carefully. He has, he said. You caught that faster than I expected. I've been reading a lot of resonance theory. I know, she said. You took 3 of my books last Tuesday. 2, he said. The 3rd one I already had. You didn't have it. You borrowed it in June and forgot to give it back. He opened his mouth, closed it, thought about it. That's possible, he admitted. She looked at him with the serene expression, and he felt, in the very ordinary middle of an argument about books and marginal notes, in the library at Grimmauld Place with papers on the table and the evening light coming through the window and somewhere downstairs the kettle beginning to boil, he felt so specifically and completely himself that it was almost strange. The sharpness of it, the clarity, like having been slightly out of focus for a long time and not noticing until the lens adjusted. This was what she did, not by trying, just by being entirely and without apology what she was, precise and strange and fully present and consistently, uncomplicatedly honest. The combination of those things directed at him had a specific effect that was cumulative and irreversible, and he was no longer interested in finding a name for it that was more manageable than what it was. He loved her. It was very simple when you said it plainly. The kettle finished downstairs. He went to make the tea. August arrived with the heat it had been promising all summer, and they drove north on a Thursday morning in Luna's small green car, the back seat full of field equipment and books and 2 bags and a hamper Molly Weasley had pressed on Harry at Sunday dinner that was slightly magical in its capacity. Luna drove. Harry read Voss's methodology chapter and made notes in the margin and tried to keep the notes readable on the A-road sections, which was imperfectly successful. They stopped in the Lake District for lunch, a pub garden outside in the sun. Luna fed something from the hamper to a crow that had positioned itself on the table with the confidence of an animal that knew its rights, and the crow accepted it with dignity and departed. Harry ate a sandwich and watched her and thought about the 41 steps between the kitchen and the front door of the Islington house, the hollowness of the counting, the differently numbered results. He didn't live there anymore. He'd started the process of sorting it, not urgently, not with the drama of a clean break, but methodically in the way of someone reclaiming the shape of their own life. Ginny had already returned her key. She'd done it on her own without prompting, which was exactly as Ginny as everything else about the past month. She'd handed it over and said take care and meant it and left, and Harry had stood with the key and thought about how grace was not the absence of grief but the willingness to keep moving despite it. He was back at Grimmauld Place. The library was theirs now. The configuration of armchair and window chair was their configuration, established by use, maintained by habit. Luna's instrument case lived on the library table. Her tea tin lived in the kitchen. The Voss correspondence lived in its own folder that she'd created and labeled the Voss argument ongoing with the exact quality of someone who was looking forward to it. He'd stopped counting steps. The Hebrides. They reached the coast on Friday evening, checked into a bed and breakfast run by a witch who recognized Luna immediately. The Sea Caves researcher, yes, you wrote last March, and were given the good room, the one that faced the water, which was doing its extraordinary North Atlantic thing in the evening light, all dark blue and moving silver and the kind of scale that reminded you that the world was very large, and most of your problems were proportionally smaller than they felt. Luna stood at the window for a long time. Harry stood behind her and looked at the same water and let it be as large as it was. Tomorrow at low tide, she said. The caves are only accessible at low tide. We'll need to be there by 7. Right. I have an instrument for the creatures, a modified biosignature scanner, though I hate the word scanner, it sounds industrial and they're not. Luna. Yes, we have all evening, he said. Tell me tomorrow. She turned from the window and looked at him. Then she looked at the evening and the water and the long gold light that was going amber at the edges as the sun angled down. She looked at all of it with the full attention she gave everything she genuinely loved. All right, she said, we have all evening. They went down to the small harbor and walked along the stone sea wall as the evening came in. The air smelled like salt and something colder underneath, the particular cold of deep water under a warm-aired surface, the temperature of things that went further down than the light did. Fishing boats in the harbor, the light on the water moving as the water moved. She told him about the creatures, not in the field report way, but in the way she told things when she was simply talking, the way she'd been talking since a train compartment at 14. How she'd found the first one by accident in the third sea cave, following a resonance signal she didn't have a prior category for. How it had looked when the light of her instrument caught it, the luminescence, the barely there quality, the sense of something at the very edge of material existence. How she'd sat very still for 40 minutes so as not to disturb it. How the second visit had produced 3 of them and the third visit 6, and by the 4th visit they seemed to have become accustomed to her and gathered in the lit parts of the cave when she arrived. They recognize you, Harry said. I think so, she said. Or they recognize the kind of attention I bring, the quality of it. She looked at the water. Most creatures respond to attention. They can tell the difference between the attention that wants to catch them and the attention that just wants to understand them. Is there a difference when you're looking at them? Between wanting to catch and wanting to understand? She considered it. Yes, always. I've never understood the impulse to possess a thing in order to know it. The knowing is in the observation, the possession changes what you're observing. She paused. It's the same with people, I think. He walked beside her and thought about that. About what it meant to know someone without requiring them to be contained in your understanding of them. The specific freedom of being known by someone who watched you with the wanting to understand kind of attention rather than the other kind. He thought about the way she'd looked at him in the Auror bullpen. The direct trajectory, going immediately to where he was standing without scanning. The way she'd known he hadn't eaten breakfast from a crease in his collar. The way she'd written Harry's back in the margin without explaining why that mattered, without translating the observation into anything larger than what it was. Understanding, not possession. Luna, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, he said. She waited. For seeing me, he said, accurately. For as long as you have. He met her eyes. I know that's not nothing for you, the waiting. She looked at the water for a moment. It wasn't difficult, she said. The seeing, I've always seen you clearly. The waiting was, she considered. The waiting was appropriate. Some things need the conditions to be right. You can't rush the tide. Is that a creature observation or a people observation? Both, she said. The same principles mostly apply. He stopped walking. She stopped a half step later and turned to look at him, and the evening light was amber now, and the water was moving behind her, and her face was what it always was, clear, entirely itself, looking at him with the full weight of knowing him. He kissed her there on the seawall, with the harbor at their backs and the North Atlantic in front of them and the sky going from amber to something deeper, and she kissed him back the way she did everything she meant, completely without performing it, just present to the thing itself. When they stepped apart, a herring gull on the seawall 3 feet away regarded them with oceanic indifference and then departed. The gull was unimpressed, Harry said. Gulls generally are, Luna said. They've seen everything. They walked back along the sea wall as the dark came in, properly dark now, the stars beginning to assert themselves in the sky above the water. Luna named constellations as they appeared, not the standard astronomical names, but the older names, the pre-Roman names from the same tradition as the standing stones, the names that were descriptions rather than honors. The bear watching, the river of fire. The 3 sisters who would not move, he learned them as she named them. Filed them in the memory that was excellent and had gotten better under training because some things were worth keeping precisely. The space between stars, he said. She looked up. The memory of light that has moved on. Or not, he said. The light is still there. It's distributed everywhere in small amounts. She looked at the stars, at the dark between them which was not empty, full of the ancient distributed light of everything that had already moved through it. Yes, she said. You're right. It's not gone, it's just, she looked at him, present everywhere in the background, part of the field. Like love, he said. She looked at him. The look had everything in it, 6 years and a train compartment and a dozen moments she'd written down because they mattered, and the moor, and the kitchen, and the death chamber, and the ley lines under Stonehenge, and the morning light, and all the things they were still going to find out. Yes, she said, exactly like that. They stood on the sea wall under the stars in August, and the world was entirely ordinary and entirely extraordinary, the way it always was when you paid it the right kind of attention, the wanting to understand kind, the kind that didn't need to possess the thing in order to know it, the kind that could look at something clearly and let it be what it was. Below, the harbor water moved with the tide. Tomorrow, at low tide, the sea caves, the barely material creatures that gathered in the light when Luna arrived, that had learned the quality of her attention and found it worth coming toward. The instruments and the journal and the careful, methodical work of understanding something the world hadn't yet found language for. And beside him, the woman who had always had language for the things the world hadn't found yet, who had carried the right words quietly and without demand and offered them when the conditions were right, which they now were. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned against his side with the ease of someone who had always known the shape of the space there, and had simply been waiting for the opportunity to occupy it. The stars were very clear above the water. The space between them was full of everything that had already moved and not been lost, distributed, ambient, present in the background of all things, the way light is present even when the source has gone, the way love is present even before it has been named. The tide came in. They stayed on the sea wall until the dark was complete and the stars were everything, and the only sound was the water, which had been making that sound for longer than anything else in the landscape, and would continue long after, indifferent and essential and entirely itself.